The only project I have in town right now is this. Here, that.
That's good.
It's just. That's. Actually, well.
Yeah. Melanie Swain, I knew.
Oh, this is.
Memory Robinson. So good. Definitely.
All right, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I don't think we have anybody online, but we are gonna record, so consider yourself warned. Thank you all for being here today. For some of the early arrivers, I spilled the beans and let everybody know that we're ending the day with a bit of a roundtable on how we define success for Compass as we move from planning to implementation. And so there's a bunch of seeds for the discussion already planted over there. And throughout the day, if you have anything you want to put up there, I just want us all to be prepared for that discussion at the end. But before we dive straight into the agenda, we're going to do just introductions like we always do. And this is a bit of a bittersweet meeting because it's our final Compass Navigation Committee meeting that is scheduled. So I'll say one of the things I put up there in thinking about success is just keeping the conversation going that this group has had, that this group has brought to the broader community. As we move into implementation, we can't stop talking. So that was what I put out there. So by way of introduction, Miles, I'm from out of Ridgeway, lucky enough to facilitate all of these Compass Navigation meetings with the great town staff. One thing we want to do on Icebreaker is, what was the most CV thing you saw or did this summer? And I think that will inform our conversation today about community spaces and how we define community spaces. So for me, it's coming into town. It's been a crazy busy summer. I hadn't spent much time in the valley, and coming into town to see the altars that are still up is just always, you're at CV, and it's such a special thing. So that was the most CV thing for me this summer. I'll go clockwise with Ken.
Kent Calvert, I'm currently serving on town council, a longtime resident, retired local firefighter as well. I don't know what the most CV thing I saw this summer was, but I always enjoy that towny takeovers, like ride a bike trip to the grocery store and stuff. Maybe the bars, so that seems I like.
Thanks. Yeah.
I'm Anna Fennerty. I'm town council of Crested Butte. I went backpacking without telling anybody this summer. Came back to lots and lots of messages. I feel like that was the most Crested Butte thing I did.
Nice. Yeah.
I'm Dana. I'm the town sustainability coordinator. I think we went on a too hard hike with a 2-month-old, so we christened our son to be outdoors on a hike that was inappropriately hard for carrying a 2-month-old.
Erin Gansler, the housing director for town. I also went hiking without telling anyone. I didn't see you though. That's awesome. I just did for my soldiers for a little bit. But I feel like I'm gonna give it a little bit of a twist. I have been actively seeking ways to figure out how to leave work and get home in the middle of the summer. And I am one of those people that is driving through the neighborhoods. Like, I can't make it onto Elk. And so I'm weaving my way through to deal with problems. And I feel like that's a thing that we're all starting to do.
My name is Caitlin Archambault, and I am a new planner with the town of Crested Butte. And the most Crested Butte thing that I did was start with the town in April, and then as people found out, immediately was bombarded with for lack of a better word, bitching about parking. And that was very CV, that was the first thing that people, wanted to talk about when they found out I was working for the town, so. That's
Welcome aboard.
Yeah.
I'm Ed Schmidt, I'm a member of Ozark, and so the current team here. We also got out of town, went to the mountains and avoided all the counties, so that's the most stupid thing we did.
Yeah.
I'm Cal Fennedy. I'm just here as a citizen. I was on the transportation planning committee. And I think the Don Cook Memorial Bus Parade was in the city bill I saw this summer. Well, yeah, it's the hospital, the city. I don't think they look at it.
My name's Chris Hensley. I've been a resident. I just realized I've only lived in town, been blessed since moving here in 1990, so. The Don Cook Memorial, just for the people that showed up, was awesome. Number two, I was playing tennis and got to see like a 70, 80-foot geyser come up behind my house. It was awesome. They're working on the water main now behind me. So you're just like, oh, they hit the water main. But they didn't, they hit my service line. And it was amazing how high it was. And then they fixed it, but this was the Crested Butte part. They just, it was all good. It was a mistake. They had to get into my crawl space and fix the pressure reducing valve because it got all filled up with gravel and stuff, but they got it done. So
Took it in stride.
Hi, I'm Valita Scribner, was on the CB Climate Action Planning Committee, Mount CB Council. And I'd say, there's a lot of CB things I did this summer, but even this morning, which is no longer summer, so I'm breaking the rules. But I bundled up in my ski gloves and beanie and got on my e-bike and biked down through town, watching all of the aspens and, just looking around being like, gosh, this place is homesteading. And I got to come here where we are continuing to do community planning together from so many different areas of expertise and interest. And that is pretty freaking CB. So that's.
I'm Jessie Early. I'm the current planning manager and I manage the historic preservation plan project. And I'd say I was gonna tailor on to what Chris and Cal said, but in my mind, the most CB thing this summer, it's kind of melancholy, but all the memorials. I feel like it really is a showing of what a great community we have and what we're trying to protect here. And I'm just always amazed at what an amazing community we have. And then also just walking the alleys, kind of like Aaron said, that's how I escape this.
I'm Jana Hansen. I'm the Director of Parks Rec, Open Space and Trails for the town. My most CB thing was definitely Donnie Cook's Memorial as well, and it's hammering rain. Everyone's still there in rain jackets, double rainbow, just like this spectacular. Wow, there's so much beauty and so much grief, and we love each other so much. And yes, we can go out there and argue over this or that issue, and it kind of ties into what would make this successful, that we're not going to make every single person happy at the end of the day with how we implement things. But that we can talk about the pros and cons, and we can say, okay, this is our path forward. We're going to get on board with the path that the community has chosen. And even though we might disagree, we're still going to love each other. We're still going to support each other. We're still going to stand out in the pouring rain to celebrate the lives of our loved ones.
Jim Starr, I was on the community plan committee and been here since '78, seen lots of changes. Been involved with the town government for quite a few years and love this place. To me, what I noticed this summer was memorials, as people have mentioned. Also, most recently, been a talk. That celebration to me really brings out young people in this community and the surrounding area. And I look at those folks and I think, that's the future of this town. That's what this is all about. And I mean, the fact that, folks who have lived here a long time are open to listening to all folks here and coming to consensus or agreement on what needs to be done to move the community forward is really an important aspect of Crested Butte. And I really appreciate that. So to me, how do we define success? We took the top 2 or 3 things of each plan, got those accomplished. That to me would be successful, because there's so much that has come out of this process that it's almost overwhelming if you look at all of it, but you focus on the most important aspects of it, try to get those accomplished, and I think that's success.
Yeah, John O'Neill, Town Council in Crested Butte. I think the most CB thing I did was Alpenblow. I didn't get to go to many because of council meetings. But I enjoy Alpenblow.
Darren McDonald, town manager for Crested Butte, and I got to help my daughter and one of Aaron's kids and another kid to do art market. It was so fun. Yeah.
Flo Cunningham, I've lived here 50 years as of September, moved here in 1975. That's kind of. Still be able to be here. I had a rough summer, and I think the community is the big thing. Obviously, for me, Donnie's thing was huge. And then also, you know, I spent 5 of 7 nights involved with Venatuck, so that was pretty huge too. I got really lucky. I told everybody I was awarded the Green Spirit Award this year, so I told them I was a harvest mother, I was a wow, and now I'm a Green Spirit, so I won the Venatuck Triple Crown. I was pretty excited. That was very Crested.
Amazing.
I'm Mel Youngma, Community Development Director, and I got to move to a new neighborhood this summer next to the Fennertys. And I think just the new and different sense of just the small town neighborliness was so CB to me, from like one of my neighbors being like, hey, I make the world's best popcorn, here's a giant jug of it, to them being like, I'm gonna blow out your irrigation system this morning, just so you know. And those like little moments have just been really amazing and just make my day.
Well, thank you all for sharing that. I think it really sets the tone on what the purpose for today's meeting is. We're gonna go around, give some updates on kind of the latest news from each plan, but then we're really gonna lean into what we think of when we think of community spaces and look at the working definition for that. And so the meeting today is really gonna allow us some time and some space to discuss that and to listen to each other. I know in a lot of these previous meetings, you know, basically 1 through 4, we packed a lot into these meetings and we've done a lot in this past 18 months. But today, we really want to focus on community spaces and give ourselves the time to really talk to each other and set the tone for implementation where our values are going to be tested. And I think one of the themes we heard in just the introductions is that interest in finding common ground and using that common ground to build some consensus on a path forward. Otherwise, change is one of those things that happens to us and we don't control it. So we want to take the time today to really have that discussion and listen to each other. And then we'll end with, as we've already started, some definitions of what success looks like as we move into this next phase of implementation. Mel, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to meeting purpose.
That's great. I just really appreciate you all your commitment to this process. I think we started meeting like almost 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago. And I know it's been a really long process, but it's a really exciting time to start moving now more into implementation and your continued engagement, being able to come together a final time while it's not the end of the community conversations. I think it's a great time to really think about and reflect on what we've accomplished together. So thank you for being here.
Amen. And so agenda for today largely follows what we've talked about. We're through the welcome and introductions and we're right on time, if not a little ahead of schedule. So we'll go through implementation updates and each plan lead is going to take 10 minutes to walk us through that. We'll try to keep clarifying questions. on the table for those updates. Ask away if you have anything you want clarified. And then at the end of that session around 10 o'clock, we'll have time to get into some bigger cross-cutting discussion on it. So again, we'll do updates on all the plans and have some Q&A discussion. And then given the attendance that we have today, we were gonna break out into two groups. I think for the community spaces conversation, we'll keep it in the room and just have one kind of group discussion on it so we can all listen to each other and really engage with, we've got a pretty small and manageable group today. So Mel, if that sounds good to you, I think we'll call an audible and just do a discussion together from 10 to 11:15. And then I think that'll also give us more time to discuss and less time to have to report out from the breakout groups. We'll just keep capturing our key takeaways as we go. And as we've talked about, we'll do a roundtable at the end on, after the discussion today, what really resonates on how we define success, what should be our North Stars as we continue to implement some of these projects. And we always do public comment at these meetings. I don't think we have anybody online or anybody in the room who's not on the navigation committee. So someone shows up, we'll do public comment and then we'll break bread and do a little lunch together. Any questions on the agenda? Okay. Well, and with that, let's get right into, we've had 4 plans working together, but I'm really excited to have the pros plan joining for the 5th. So we now have 5 plans working together and we'll do some updates on each, starting with.
So just to give a quick general update of what these last 4 years have been kind of a vortex. You've had a lot of planning going on, but it's really that strategic planning and working towards navigating our future together with the community, that started with the community compass and is really now led into those vision plans and strategy around those key goals of the compass, from transportation mobility, historic preservation, climate action, community plan, and now the growth plan. And really with those, how do those all work together, recognizing there's so many opportunities between all those different topics, but also some hard trade-offs that need to be talked about. And that's what you all have really done such an amazing job on those advisory committees and with this navigation committee. And those weren't just plans to make plans and have fun with that, but they're really directly influencing and leading our regulations and programs. So now going into the zoning code update with the community plan, the design standards update with the historic preservation plan. What is our housing strategy? What is our sustainability program? What are those pros programs that are really influenced by those goals and strategies that then tie directly back to the compass? And all of those directly influence what you actually see on the ground. It might not feel like a water main break or a new housing project. Seems like it connects, but it really all ties back to those goals and values of the community that we spend so much time working on together. So it's really exciting to say that 4 of those plans now are adopted and starting to move into implementation, and we'll give updates on those. And then the pros plan kicked off this spring that Jana can introduce to you all, and that's now in the success measures phase. And they do have an exciting outreach event coming up next week that she'll give an overview of. So starting with an update on the transportation mobility plan. We have quite a lot going on with this. We are working on designing the roundabout or peanut about at the entrance of town. The design's currently at 30%. And we did have an open house and a lot of stakeholder meetings last week and got some really great feedback. We do have some brochures about it if you want to take that home with you, and there will be more opportunity to participate, particularly at the 60% design phase, which will be coming in January with the town council. We also have the county has officially executed the Safe Streets for All grant, which provided $2.1 million of funding for this, which is 80% of our initial cost estimate of the project. So it's pretty significant, and it also provides funding for the Brush Creek roundabout. So that was officially executed, which there were, we weren't sure if it was going to happen. Mountain Express has also been developing their 5-year plan. And what's really exciting is they're bringing the final plan to their board meeting tomorrow. And one of the biggest outcomes of that is to serve the east side of town and start leveraging the school parking lot as a park and ride, having a bus stop over there because they'll be able to turn left on Red Lady with a roundabout. And that's something we directly asked for them to look at and evaluate in the transportation mobility plan. So we're really excited to see that starting to come to fruition. And they are applying for funding from the state from a new opportunity called the Clean Transit Enterprise to help fund that potential expansion. The Gunnison County Corridor Plan plans to kick off in this only fourth quarter now, I guess it is October next week. So that corridor plan will really look at what's the land use vision along the full corridor and how does it really integrated with infrastructure and transportation. I'm sure as you're driving up the corridor right now, you see Whetstone happening, you see all these things happening, it's quite a lot going on. And this plan, while Whetstone was really designed intentionally to be very transit focused with the underpass under Brush Creek to really have good access to the RTA and really be a very walkable community and have good transit access. How can we kind of learn from that when it comes to the full corridor plan to try to see how can we really tie land use with transportation instead of having kind of sprawl like we may be seeing in a lot of other communities and valleys across Colorado. And then we continue managing parking and traffic calming. The county council will have an annual review every March. I know there's lots of feelings on different sides and different days that parking's too aggressive. There's not enough parking regulation. There's too many parked cars. There's not enough parking spaces, and that will just always continue to be an ongoing conversation with the town council. I think we're gonna roll through all the plan updates and then we'll do questions.
Yeah, if there's any clarifying questions, just please ask away, but we'll have some discussion after that fits.
I'll turn it over to Dan.
Morning. When we were working on this presentation, I had to giggle to myself a little bit. My colleagues had to remind me how much was going on since I was welcoming my son over the summer. Climate action. So in April of this year, council adopted the climate action plan. We were recommending to the climate action plan a few changes to the building code that would help us use touch points and permitting to collect some data, energy assessments to help us understand where some parts of town may or may not be more energy efficient or inefficient. Since then, we've had a couple of discussions with council, and we've kind of stepped back from that, and we're looking at climate action through a lens of affordability. So we're really going to be working hard this next year to develop building energy efficiency programs that, as Mel puts it, are so attractive, why wouldn't you do it, is our goal. And so we'll be working on that, kind of building on the success of the Green Leaf program, which most of you are familiar with. We'll also be focusing on some waste initiatives. Mainly this year, y'all are probably familiar, the Save As You Throw program, where folks have the opportunity to reduce their trash cost if they are able to and would like to reduce the amount they're sending to the landfill. We'll be working on aligning with state model codes. We just did this with some solar codes, making sure that we're not being too punitive and also keeping up with what's going on at the state level. Internally, we've been doing a lot with our facilities and our town buildings. We worked on an energy efficiency and electrification plan, lovingly known as the EE&E plan in town, helping us to understand which buildings are kind of in the worst shape energy efficiency wise, so that we can help council, here's what's most important, kind of prioritize those improvements for them. We're also now monitoring some newer buildings that were built to the 2021 IECC codes, and also some buildings that were built to older codes, so we can understand when we adopted these electrification codes and above code requirements, did it make a difference? So this is really cool. One anecdote I heard from the folks who are helping us, it's Nunatech Solar. They can track down to the amount of time you're using a certain appliance. So one of the staff that they're working with said, we know somebody's a baker because their oven's on all the time. So I thought that was kind of cool, that we can see down to that granular level. The town was always going to continue as long as council is willing to support GCA. As far as we know, with everything that's going on, while the GCA is still charging forward on making sure we have the most renewables as possible. So we'll continue to support them in those endeavors and make sure that as we electrify, we can leverage that renewable energy as the grid gets more renewable. We are going to be working on delivering more data to the community. So the hope is next year we're going to have, I'll say, pilot a sustainability report Figure out how often we want to be delivering that, if the community is interested in seeing it at a certain frequency. So that's coming next year. And then this is not directly under sustainability, but I know that one topic that council will likely be interested in hearing more about, it's come up a few times in the community, is how are we planning for resiliency, right? We can try to work on reducing our carbon at the front of the issue as much as possible, and we know that the effects of climate change are coming. And so what are we doing on that side as well? Carolyn DeGroot, our town engineer, has been leading the Wildfire Ready Action Plan. Forgive me, I don't know the status. I think they're getting pretty close to done with that. I know they've done some community meetings, helping us understand as the town how we protect our water source and help protect our buildings from wildfire. So we know we're at pretty high risk for that. So that's all of my updates. Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, sorry, what does WI stand for?
I'm sorry,
WI?
WUI, that's the Wildland Urban Interface Codes.
Okay.
Maybe Jesse, you can give a better description.
The state of Colorado actually adopted their own, which is the Wildfire Resiliency Code. The WUI code is more like the international building codes, and so it's for the whole country. Colorado found that some of the sections didn't really pertain to them, so they did more of a statewide code, which was just adopted, I think. And then we will need to adopt that by next March, I think, and then have that start to implement that by June. And so, like Dana's saying, that will impact our design standards and all those things. So just helping to implement those.
And the WUI codes dictate types of building materials, right?
Exactly,
That
yeah.
help us be more resilient to
Yeah.
natural disasters. Thank you.
What's up next?
Thank you so much, Mel. The pros plan, park, rec, open space and trails. So, you know, with all of the planning and growth that we're seeing throughout our community, it was really important timing for us to work on our recreation systems and our protecting our conserved lands and open space opportunities. And really trying to be strategic about how we go about that in order to meet the demands of a growing community. And so, you know, when we think about all of our neighbors and the regional development that we're seeing, you know, Lexium's a great example with just the new community members that will be coming to town. And they will have children that will want to participate in our programs, and the adults will probably want to play pickup volleyball or ping pong downstairs with Les and all of the different things that we have. And so we're really trying to figure out how we can balance the demand with capacity and still be financially sustainable. And so an outcome of this will be a cost recovery model, really looking at spaces and trying to identify what the key needs are. So right now, the thing that's risen to the top is really indoor recreation spaces. Jerry's Gym downstairs is currently the only indoor publicly accessible recreation space in the North Valley. And it's old, it was built in 1927, so we will hopefully have an opportunity to renovate and possibly expand Jerry's Gym. It's a historic structure, so of course we're working very closely with Jessie and her consultants on that. And then just really looking at how we look regionally and be good regional partners. So the MetRec just recently did a regional master plan. There's definitely services, amenities that are provided by our partners in CB South. There's tennis and pickleball courts throughout the community, so we're definitely not the only provider, and we rely really heavily on our partner organizations for programs. So West Elk Soccer, West Elk Hockey, Adaptive has incredible programs. There's so many different entities that are providing recreational services. So we're really trying to work with our stakeholders and figure out how can we collectively meet the demand and meet the need of our larger North Valley community. And then also looking at, for our open space program, we haven't had a lot of structure or definition around, you know, what our priorities and values are for conservation, you know, specifically how we can spend our real estate transfer tax. So, I don't think I need to go into the weeds about that, but every time a property is bought or sold, a portion of that goes to fund open space. And so looking at, what are our values as a community and there's state values, there's, Crested Land Trust, which is a key partner for us in conservation. But what is the town of Crested Butte value? What are we uniquely positioned to provide in all of these things, whether it's open space trails, Parks Rec? And then also really looking at connectivity and how we move around town and looking at getting people out of cars with access to the 600+ miles of trail that we have. And how do we make them more accessible for more people for multi-use? How do we keep people in their cars at the trailheads, in the corners of town or the four-way, and then get people to where they want to go? So we're reducing the number of cars that are out there on dirt roads and in more sensitive habitats. For still access to recreation, which is, obviously a priority for our community. So that's what's going on with the Prost plan. We do have a pumpkins and portraits community outreach event. We have a local photographer, Jason Kate, who is doing fall portraits. So we'll be at the Town Ranch Gazebo from 3 to 6, a week from today. Today's Wednesday, October 1st. So we've got pumpkins for free that Clark's is providing. We'll have Big B's apple cider. We'll have cookies. We're partnering with the chamber, and so hopefully they will be able to come and bring possibly some face painting, possibly some balloon animals. So Heather's working her magic with some of our community partners on that. So come on out, have your free portrait taken, and weigh in. You can see our current concepts and different ideas for that plan.
What time is it at?
3 to 6. And if you have, networks that you can push it out to, tell people to come get a pumpkin and a free portrait.
Forgot to mention, if you didn't get one of these brochures in the paper last week, it has a summary of all the plans we're talking about today and those key dates like October 1st on the back.
Oh, there we go. That's it.
Okay, well, the historic preservation plan was adopted December of 2024. It's really exciting. It's our first year, as you guys know. So what are we doing now? One of the first things that will help to inform some of the other updates is a survey of the buildings from our new early recreation and ski era. And so we're under contract with both the state and a consultant who also helped to do the survey work for the historic preservation plan. His name's Ron Sladek. He's out of Fort Collins, and so he'll be starting that work in October. So that's very exciting, and that work will help to inform which buildings are contributing to that new district and new period of significance for our update to the standards and guidelines, which was another of our items that we were tasked with doing through the historic preservation plan. And so we've issued the RFP that's due this Friday at 5, and we're excited. We had a lot of firms that came to an optional meeting earlier in the process, and so we're hopeful that we get a lot of good submittals. And then we have a kickoff with Beaux-Arts at the November Beaux-Arts meeting to kick off that process basically, and it'll have a series of public meetings through Beaux-Arts, just so Beaux-Arts can hear feedback, and then subsequent meetings where they can talk about that feedback. And then the final thing is which we'll talk about in multiple areas, but our updates to the zoning code, which will include that second period of significance, updates to our demolition code, and then the reduction of the local historic district to a buffer area. And then language to ensure that Beaux-Arts still has the power to review outside of that boundary. So we've been working internally on those updates to the zoning code, and we're starting in October and November, going out to the public with the different zone districts and the proposed ideas for changes. So it's really exciting, the things that we're working on. And then next year, the big push will be to develop an incentive program for how do we help to protect those buildings from each of those the existing period of significance and then the new period of significance to help people maintain those or stabilize those, just because it is expensive to do that. So yeah.
I think we have Aaron and Caitlin.
Morning, everybody. That we're taking stretch of the caffeine. So the community path plan is number 5 on the list, if I count correctly. Yes, we're good. The goal of the community plan is to improve the livability, functionality, and sense of community in Crested Butte. And we're looking at our regulatory environment to figure out ways to incentivize private sector participation in that. Because the town simply can't accomplish all of that by itself from a budgetary perspective. And so we're looking at development regulations that can guide that market investment. So we go through this process of identifying our values, both through all these plans and the original compass. And now we're looking at ways that we can use these regulatory tools to help us generate more community housing and community serving spaces, which I know is an interesting buzzword. We'll be diving into it. And so when we look at these 2 primary objectives, we want to diversify and distribute community housing. We've been working on housing for a long time. We've, I think maybe Telluride and the Roaring Fork might have a longer history than we do, in a couple other places, but we've made incredible progress. 25% of our housing stock is deed restricted in some way or another. That's pretty impressive. It has not solved the problem. The price to create one more of those units is now becoming out of grasp for both the private sector in terms of the regulatory environment that back in the 90s when we adopted the ADU program, people could build an ADU and rent it. And when the costs for construction were low enough that normal rents would help them pay their mortgage and would help pay for the construction of the ADU. That whole calculus has changed. And so we're not seeing much community or private sector participation in addressing our housing problem anymore. And so we have to rethink how we go about this. What are the tools we can put in place, both in terms of a regulatory space as well as incentives that we can hopefully create more momentum on the private sector to help us respond. On the community side of things, like as that departure with construction costs happens and the increase in land prices, what we're seeing happen is that every commercial space that changes hands now results in new calculus as well. The answer is luxury. That is the only thing that can come out of $1 million, $4 million, $5 million commercial property prices. And so we are losing a lot of the spaces and services that serve our community. They also serve the tourist population and second home population. But those of us who live here year round are running out of places to go hold a birthday party for a reasonable price, to hang out and have a beer in the sun in the afternoon. And so we want to understand, like, what are we losing? What's important there? And how might town facilitate private sector response as well as town's response into finding more opportunities to preserve and create community serving spaces. So, thanks. Sorry, I'll leave that. Was there more or is it Caitlin?
So just to piggyback off of what Aaron was saying, and this is familiar to all of you because this is what we heard from you all in the compass navigation and then from community as feedback in writing the community plan. And this is what we're going to use to guide us as we move forward into implementation. But townwide parking requirements in line with our transportation mobility plan, we want to emphasize people over cars. And so right size parking in areas that we can in order to move towards that plan. And working in the neighborhoods, and Aaron spoke to this, we want to work with gentle infill of ADUs and possibly micro lots in order to diversify our housing, what we've got in housing, and also to maybe bring the cost down. But we also want to be really, really careful of preserving our neighborhoods and the historic neighborhoods that we have, as Jesse spoke to. Looking at Bellevue is critical. This is our commercial core. So we want to preserve and grow community serving commercial. Again, we're going to really, that's that buzzword that we're going to work on today. What is community serving spaces? But we want to leverage our zoning in that area to try and incentivize or in exchange for prioritizing community serving spaces and then possibly housing as well. And then with the 6th Street corridor, this one we pulled back a little bit because we really heard that this is the welcome to Crested Butte. This is the spine that connects town. And so we didn't want to move forward too quickly. So we eased back on that a little bit and said, let's hone in on our PUD process and see how we can incentivize and provide flexibility with development, but really build in what we need and what we want. But then work with some multifamily zones in the existing R4 and T zones. To again, provide more housing to incentivize multifamily units there. So again, this should look familiar, but just a recap of what this group has been working on.
Thanks, Caitlin. So the community plan really helped us identify the vision for the future of really growing our community serving housing and then also preserving and growing community serving spaces. But now we need to actually make it happen. So we're already getting started on our zoning code update, which is really about enabling that vision. How can we allow through our regulatory processes ADUs to be more appealing and incentivize, or things like micro lots to happen, or things like parking requirements to not be a challenge for these types of projects. Oops. And then at the same time, we're also going to be developing a new 5-year housing strategy and this community spaces strategy that will get into starting to define that today to really help us implement the vision. And that really goes hand in hand with the zoning code to help us identify, hey, we have these regulations to help enable more ADUs, but what other types of programs or things can we help that actually happen and complement that? Is it funding support? Is it pre-approved building plans? What type of deed restriction or requirements come with that ADU? How does that fit into our overall housing strategy? So we will take a break here, I think, on some questions and comments on these updates, and we'll dive more into what this implementation will look like after that, as far as process and those sorts of things. So.
And before we jump into questions, do any clarifying points or questions that you all want to ask on the community plan? The community plan is one that obviously has a lot of fairly technical pieces that start to weave everything together. So any clarifications on this one that anybody wants to point out?
Just a question.
Yeah, Jim.
What if anything is going to be happening in regards to the Sixth Street situation? The committee talked in part about kind of dividing the Sixth Street corridor into the area which is south of the four-way, the area that goes from there up to Mount Crested Butte. That wasn't done, and so now the whole area, including your area up here by towards the ski area, is still wide open to the current regs. And I was wondering, again, what if anything has been done to move forward with that strategy?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Jim. So as we now get into the zoning code update and the conversations get more specific, we can definitely unpack that more as we look to the B2 zone along 6th Street. Does that become 2 different zones? Do we keep it as one? The general direction from the adopted community plan was, let's really look at our planned unit development process, knowing a lot of new development, but on 6th Street would likely occur under that, and really see how we shape that to help guide us in the direction we want to go. But as we get into this update, we'll dive deeper into those specifics. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thanks.
Sounds like you should be at the November 11th meeting. That's specific to 6th Street.
Yeah.
There you go. And I
Is that a
think,
Bozar meeting or what is it?
Those are the webinars. So if you go to the back of these brochures, we're doing some webinars from late October to about Thanksgiving time on each of the different categories of our zoning code that talk about those types of considerations that are worth looking at. So yeah, 6th Street on November 11th. Thanks, Chris.
yeah, and one of the things we like to talk about when we look at implementation is that zoning is really a great reflection of community value. So as we get into implementation, that's where the values in the planning work really, is truly reflected. And one of my favorite sayings is zone it like you mean it. And that's kind of the phase that we're entering into now. And if Mel, we could go back maybe just a couple slides. One breadcrumb I wanted to point out on one more maybe.
Rose.
Now we're going forward. Perfect. I think it's the next. Right here. This is the working definition for community spaces that we're gonna workshop this afternoon is really embedded here in this objective around the community serving spaces. And simply, it is really spaces for local serving businesses, nonprofits, services, gathering places that meet everyday needs and foster community connection. So that's that working definition, just to get us all thinking about what we're gonna be talking about this afternoon. Hopefully that's, or, yeah, sorry. It's still gonna be boring.
Oh my God, are we even this afternoon too?
All day.
All day. No, you're right. Yeah, it's gonna be later this morning, but that's a breadcrumb. I just wanted to point out, and get us thinking about the working definition that we're gonna interrogate later today.
Awesome. So we've done a lot of planning, but throughout it all, and as you can already see, we've done a lot of implementation too. So we have just done by the number highlights of some things going on. It comes back to how you define success. Which again, at the end, we'll talk about what does success look like as you move into implementation. But there has been quite a bit of implementation happening along with this planning, and we just want to spend some time to open it up now and talk about what stood out to you in these updates, and where else are you seeing feeling progress and or change, and what general questions or thoughts do you have on these updates?
I like the garbage can reduction.
Can we go back?
My garbage can has never been full,
Yeah.
and to have the garbage can smaller and pay less money, I'm all about it. My husband is, and he wanted the big one. I said,
And I think Dana had to go, but that's the pay as you throw program. We're gonna.
Yeah,
it's-
say it.
Save as you throw, yeah. Save as you throw. And that lends to affordability. That's a great example of that.
How many households do we serve with the trash?
410, so.
So that's who changed their size, so a third.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Behavior changes on.
I'd like to just do a quick plug on that impact on the operating profile of the Ruby, which is the 6 bedroom common area bunkhouse property that the town bought right in the height of COVID to have seasonal workers. And it's one of our biggest consistent monthly expenses has been trash. And by being able to right size, we literally have dropped $250 a month from our operating expenses on a property that sometimes cash flows. You know, it's like, it's being able to have that flexibility and actually have it right size for the households and individuals that live there is really a cool thing.
106 parking tickets.
Per week.
Hard to see it.
What? That's the summer so far. There's still a week left and I still want to get it.
It's something that's
You're sorry,
gonna have
4
to be
weeks left.
addressed. You know, the one that is working.
And all the money you spend. I don't even know how much money, how much is in the budget for the parking person to give parking tickets?
I agree with the point that it may not be a highlight, maybe a fact, and it may be a necessary evil, but a program highlight,
I think it's an interesting discussion point as parking always is.
maybe a slight interesting discussion point.
Yeah, 4K are the best part.
I think we included that one knowing that it's controversial because all of these plans and strategies come with like opportunities and trade-offs, and it's one of those of, yeah, it's maybe not how you define success, but is it something that's part of our overall transportation strategy? It's something to think about, but of course, it's a very controversial one and depends on how you define success.
Those are all issued by the parking specific guy.
No,
Most Marshall.
Most, like the vast majority.
there's also like a legal parking, like coordinator, so yeah, really loaded in this. Takes us.
I think our intentions with the program is good, I just not sure that it's clear enough to our guests and our residents, that we get so much feedback. So I think it's good intention, we've implemented a program, but there's probably ways to improve.
What is that, like, what was that last year?
And I'm not sure if that's just a weather.
But it's also fairly new, like maybe 5 years ago, that would have been single digit number.
I mean, it's only since they put the parking restrictions on the two streets on the other side of Elgin, which is
Right, I'm sorry.
caused what's going on. I don't know. I'm fortunately 4 blocks off, so doesn't affect me.
I think we also have, as at a council level, have heard very recently a lot about it, but throughout the summer, I think it wasn't until the last week or so, when things started to slow down, that we really heard that feedback from the community about the frustration in an email form.
When you say that, and was it, comments from the general public or from the commercial, the business folks?
Yeah, some confusion about what the signs meant recently is like, how did I get a ticket because of this? This doesn't seem right. Nobody seems to know how it works, those kind of comments recently.
Well, and changing it from that very confusing signs we used to have a few years back with, every other, as opposed to changing the dates, has confused people. And a lot of people don't know what date it is
Yes.
in life. I have to say that, but that's.
And this is definitely a rabbit hole, but, like I registered for a permit. I don't think I actually got a physical permit, but was I supposed to?
No.
Okay, so once you're registered, you're registered. Okay. So I haven't been parking. So I was just like, oh. Yeah, thanks. I'd be curious in this highlight to like hear like super high level of like what the results of those 65 green tea participants were, like, I don't know, like bullet points of, improvement projects implemented or energy saving.
Yeah, so we'll be digging into that a lot with the council over the next quarter.
Okay.
As we start to re-envision where that program is headed, now that we know that GDP is not going to continue in its current form.
And so that number includes number of households that have gone through the assessment, that have accessed what we currently call tier 1, which is kind of just general weather stripping, and that we'll phrase it as the low hanging fruit, like you've got a super refrigerator, it's a huge consumer of energy. And then also households that have gone back for phase 2 funding for additional improvements, which grant about $5,000 per household to access additional funds.
So that's from the beginning of the year?
I think no, that's the combined total of over the last 3 years the program has run. I believe.
Yeah, Dan had to step out, but I believe it's since we started the program. Just a little anecdotal tidbit back to the big focus on affordability with a lot of these plans. I went through Green Deed myself this summer, and next week I'm installing a heat pump to replace our 30-year-old furnace. And being an appreciation capped unit, I was really looking at what's the most cost effective option, and that one came out on top thanks to Green Deed and all the other rebates. So I was really positive. That's a story. Cool.
You mentioned housing units built or under construction. Were there any ADUs deed restricted that were permitted or constructed?
Yeah,
So
we had a couple. We have about 2 a year, I think, is about roughly what we've had. And a lot of that is thanks to Andrew Hadley. So if you see him.
He is on the committee but couldn't join today, but he's really been the only one bringing them through. Yeah.
Now, it'd be interesting to see what the traffic calming has done in terms of average speed.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. Do we have the cell phone, speed? That was a limited time thing.
Oh, really? Why? Cause you have to pay a fee to access.
We don't have that at the moment, but we do have the speed alert signs, and we will be looking at data from that as well.
Oh, there's
Annual
like data?
update.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
It's a manual process to go through. Okay. I think we can anecdotally say we have a lot fewer complaints about speed in the neighborhoods.
And my complaints are still high and we don't have any in front of our house, so.
Are people really going
And
10 miles an hour on
I
out
agree with you.
with the chairs and stuff out? Are people really going 10 miles an hour? I mean,
No, not everyone.
and I do think one of the best things Troy ever said was he thought that locals were as much at fault as so I find I'm going 9 miles an hour. On purpose. You know,
2 radar devices are a great source of entertainment, starting at about 10:30. We hear a whole group leaving a bar, seeing if they can run 11 miles an hour.
Yeah. Not bad.
No, it is. You know, you'll get a couple falling down, scoring 3 miles an hour. But it's a source of entertainment.
Pretty good. What else? What else comes to mind? Are there other places you're seeing implementation that we didn't go over that you have questions about or thoughts about?
One thing that's not on here is we are just finishing up the alley survey and we resurveyed all the outbuildings from our current period of significance. So that's an exciting piece that will help to also inform the design standards update as well. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure you've all been excited for that alley survey.
I know there hasn't been consensus about whether or not the compost program should be in climate action. But that is something that the town council focused a lot on, and it's kind of in our green area. So keeping that on the table is something that we're implementing that's been requested in light of all of this planning processes.
Yeah, I think that's great, and not to step out, but I know she's working on looking at the Save As You Throw program. There's some opportunities of funding savings in there to potentially talk with the council about the compost. Over 6.
It seems like we should celebrate the housing. I mean, that's 85 units that are in process or built. That's a lot. Cause those homes will be here for a long, long time.
It's 48.
48. Well, 37, 34, and 11.
Oh,
Yeah, the 34 is the portion of 37.
It's still.
When you see it, it's like, I was with John, I ended up.
I like that number.
And frankly, being on the inside access to seeing people walk into their units and signing a lease makes me verklempt, just gonna say. People seeking housing security and being in and out of housing lotteries for literally years. If somebody in the lottery this time coming up who has, I think, moved 24 times in the last 14 years. Like, that's hard. That's hard. And families with kids looking for stability, and it's really an absolute joy to help set that up.
And just building one house is so hard to do. So 48.
You're this big.
So much energy.
I have a long-term mentor in the housing space, and she is right that the effort it takes to do a small project versus a big project is the same, so you might as well just go big.
True.
When it comes to house.
When it comes to housing, correct.
Your thoughts?
Well, and I think housing is a good one to end on, because it's a perfect segue into the community spaces conversation. You know, the progress that's been made on the housing side and community housing. I mean, I think of all the rural and mountain communities that I have the privilege of working in, the progress that you've made locally here is huge, and you've made a lot of progress on it. It's an interesting segue into the other portions of the community places that we rely on, and how that's defined. I hadn't heard of community serving spaces really before CB kind of, coined this term. So I think by recognizing the progress that's been made on the housing front allows us to keep that momentum into the community serving spaces front. So before we go there, any final thoughts on the progress that you've seen?
Do we have any kind of idea what our percentage of full-time residents is? Like, do we only know that number every 10 years or something, or is it more frequent than that. Somehow.
Doing a census, gosh,
Every other year, every 3 years.
but it's a big effort to go door to door to everyone. But last year we did update it and we were at 66% full time. So it's been pretty consistent around 65, 66 for the last few. But that is down from 80%, I think was 2000.
Yeah, 9 years.
Okay.
And then to compare us to some other skiers, I just wonder if that is 11. So.
We're shopping in high.
Around CBD, I think it's like 75% vacancy.
Yeah, and that's actually higher than it was 25 years ago. 25 years ago, it was about 11 as well. And so it's been an interesting change over time. But how do you stop a loss? You know,
So we're hold on to that number and it's a big hope of the community plan.
I would say a highlight is just, there's 5 adopted plans. Four. So 4 adopted plans, and just the energy and the intentionality and direction and what is provided. So we can is incredible.
I feel like sometimes that progress is invisible. You know what I mean? Like, these are obviously really cool numbers to have in front of us to say, hey, stuff is happening and we're watching and we're trying to gauge the changes and track the changes so we can see success and measure success. But it really does make a difference when we change these regulations, when we change how we look at something in the policy that we set, it actually does create a new track of reality. I see that in the housing space as we are stepping into compliance and being active on that side, you know, trying to be proactive, definitely are now being reactive. That it moves homes into the hands of qualified owners. It causes ADU owners to get a lease and get a tenant. That by saying, we're gonna do this and sticking to our guns, like, change happens. And so it's cool to see, like, sometimes I feel like it's so busy, you know, that we're sitting there having these meetings, talking, but like change is actually happening at the same time. It's just incremental, but it's intentional when it's happening.
I think John has a really good point, and maybe a question of our council members on the committee is, have you seen these plans be really helpful in your decision making? Is a question to date.
I think what's so helpful is how many people participate in each of those, and that's what I was gonna bring up is how many emails you get when they show up to talk about things, how many people you send emails out to to give updates on this, and I think that that's what's really helped serve my decision making, is maybe less so the plans themselves, because I feel so heavily involved in that. It's kind of funny to use them as a reflection point. But how many people continue to show up and talk about it, I think that's been really informal. And the conversations that happen in these spaces that we are creating through the planning process, I think that's helps inform decisions a lot.
And when I'm in council making decisions and trying to figure out a criteria to use for decision making, a lot of times it's difficult to figure out what criteria to use, and sometimes when it's less clear to me, I definitely go back to the values and the goals of the town. So when I'm confused or lost a little bit about how to evaluate something or what criteria to use, I always go back to this stuff, and that really brings me back to being more in line. So it's very, very valuable. It's kind of a default mode, so, and it's a good default mode for me.
I think for me, they provide focus to drive change, right? There's sort of a lot of talking and decisions and all this council stuff that you gotta just wade through. But then there's all the plans of providing, you know, action points that drive change. Or at least we're getting into the implementation to drive change. Which that's exciting to me, to see those kinds of decisions being made.
Thank you all for sharing that. Well, I think we're gonna start moving into our big discussion on community spaces. Do we want to take maybe a few minute break before we do that?
Yeah.
5-minute coffee refresh and that over. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds like a great idea. Yeah, why don't we convene back at 10:15?
John seems to get copies of research on our southern. When he said. Look on this, pretty much. Like. When John was telling me.
Perfect.
Yeah. No, it's so fun, you know, like the three was good.
She moved
away, oh no, he divorced. When you do it, fun, that's
One grand.
Jesse's really good, and Riley.
Yeah.
Joe, they know.
And are there three that live that stuff, but
Yeah.
number is good.
Yeah, because, yeah.
Are you guys traveling with all the even?
No, I think it was just like, oh, people.
That's awesome.
And I was like,
Yeah.
we're gonna see Jamie's family.
So,
Over the depth.
Oh.
Wow.
Got that.
Yeah.
That's
Pretty much pretty fun. Was she out?
James, he's he put in the tag this year.
Yeah.
Big league, we just didn't know how he feels, but he's doing that field and then going fishing, and so really. He hasn't been camped, all his house stuff, and so he just is so great. They came out last night because he has the equipment. And he was like he was just. He just rejuvenated, yeah, and so they went, I made a nice big suit, warm suit, and then they sent that off on their way, and so they're excited.
Yeah. It's really.
I'm so excited, yeah, yeah, and he needs to go to have some really looked at, but really other guys, he's getting way better. Moments that I come up,
Doing great. Yeah.
you still
Right.
you are,
Yeah.
you still.
Ben,
Okay.
don't walk in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I tried to get out, so. Coming down close.
well, it's weird, those things,
Yeah.
that's good, because they like.
Yeah.
I saw a big bird out at Bill Lacy's yesterday, after she had seen the bird. Oh, cool. May pointed it at me, and I was like, oh, but he goes to rocks, when I realized, and I was like, oh my God, it's you. I was like, how did I question you? Yeah, so,
I said,
I know, yeah,
wonder if that's part of the herd, like, if you've ever been in wetlands.
I wondered that as well, just know where to stay, like, okay, we're sticking here, we're not,
Yeah, you know,
they're smart.
babies or whatever. Class or. Yeah. So I love this time of year.
I mean, those are every day. It's so awesome.
Yeah. This is Friday, is a Thursday.
It's really good.
No one's celebrating that, but not at all.
But there isn't, you know, when they.
Right, but if we don't invest in that, so you're choosing the right.
Aaron, Aaron shared that in 2020, it was 11%. Occupancy in that city, so they. Obviously, okay, 25,
President of his own. It's kind of, yes. CPE. Was investing.
Yeah.
Some type of transportation, something. And so that transportation analysis was done. And it was sent to them to analyze. So, yeah, so yeah. Analyze this plan. Airport. I wish I could remember what this subject it was, but I would done that at the time. I wanted to look at it with what I showed it, but I can't feel.
Yeah, okay, so, and that was 25 years ago, so 2000.
Craziest thing I've ever seen in my life is in there.
And then that's always.
Yeah, 70. Yeah. Okay, yeah, okay, so that's really.
And I was like, so how are we, like, if there's only that many people active with it.
Yeah.
Like, it contradicted what that's not sure, we're advocating for some improvements that they thought. It's like, it's like, they were. The number of houses that were. generate more daily trips versus the updates. Long time ago.
Well, yeah, that's, I was actually on the bus with Shannon last night, and we were talking about it a little bit. At like 10 o'clock at night, just not talking about it.
What's happening?
Yeah, that our current partners. And also, who knows how that was. That was the first system. And was that like bad report that I was not at all. So they know that. Yeah. What's that is yeah. You know, and, but, there's so you're connected that, you know, I was very serious. You know, providing all this is down here. Right, community and public places and so, yeah. What is that, like, what is that? Is that happiness? Do we want to be hired? You know, to me personally, I'm like, well, that amount of vacancy when there is like, there's still massive. It's like, constructed as yes. Oh my God. Must be so hard. Give that
Are they really going like my way to
There, I don't get no way to
And that's so for the housing, I know there's been some that kind of like housing development. Yeah.
Hence the test.
Is there anything? Like, it's coffee. I would love that. Yeah, I mean, being on mountain views, on Capitol, and also on this is like, Ford.
That's all it is.
Everything's so much learning right now that.
The way it's aggravated and fun, I'm still in person there.
You're in. I'm trying to figure out. Yes, we have a, you know, a master bonus, but. You know, what. You know, be that it. With the systems that we have, so I'd love to hear more about that.
All dressed.
I like that.
I love that. Same stories like that. And there's maybe a little bit more attention, but almost that interesting. Never was like get friends to develop the values. I built my car.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm looking over someplace to.
Yeah, and also we have a master plan, and it's really good, but it's not. It's there, but we're not actually.
We'll get started again in just a minute here.
In very sustainable. If we don't have. I think you've probably heard that, but house in the street. For that CD and like one that I just always like. Have your presence there, you have their experience. Yeah. So it looks like. Yeah.
There's a lot of change and that change. Okay, progress, so also pretty about. How we want to drive.
Yeah.
You bubble a little more.
It's just registered there and that's to be.
You should take that for the.
All right, everybody, I think we've got almost everyone. So we're gonna go into just a few more slides to kind of set up our breakout discussions. But because we're breaking out together here, we brought both of our little prompts here, and you can see we've seeded the discussion with a few places that are some examples of community spaces. And so before we introduce the discussion with a few slides, we wanted to just call out the working definition of community spaces that we went over, spaces that serve local serving businesses, nonprofits, gathering places that meet everyday needs and foster that community connection. And as we have our discussion today, we want to really get into, what are we at risk of losing? What do we want to preserve when we're thinking about the community spaces? And how can we incentivize the things we want to see more of and disincentivize some of the things we want to see less of? So that's just a little warm up to the discussion we're going to have, and I'll cede the floor to Val and Karen.
Yeah, so as we go into setting up for these breakouts, we just want to go a little deeper on what the implementation of the community plan will look like. So as we mentioned, the community plan gave us that vision and recommended those tools, but now we get into the details to enable the vision and implement the vision. And this one is so closely tied with the historic preservation plan and our design standards. And really the design standards and zoning code really shape the look, feel, and function of our community. And today we're going to really dig into that function aspect when it comes to communities. So I think first I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin to talk about what the zoning code update process is.
Yeah, so just a really broad overview, what we've been doing, and kind of I'd like to say we're wrapping up. We're still working with the attorney on the overarching code structure, so not like the fun stuff, kind of the, what is it gonna look like, and make sure we're doing things legally, defensively correct. And then we've been working with Bozar already, introducing this development review process and our code structure work. And then where we're at now, navigation committee, here we are, bringing Compass Navigation together for implementation. What's our next step here? On October 6th, we'll have a joint session with Bozar and Council to start diving into these guiding strategies, housing, spacing definitions, which is what we are talking about today. So this could be a nice foundation for that. We have a consultant that we're working with, and they're actually coming to town tomorrow, that we're working on the technical and market analysis to really drive our zoning code update. And so that along with community outreach, like Jana spoke to earlier, not everyone is going to agree, but trying to pull stakeholders in so that everyone understands the intent and the goal and says, I'm on board with that. And then finally, and this is out in the future, we will work with Council and Bozar to continue to refine and then eventually adopt a new zoning code and design standards.
Just as a side fun fact, has anyone in this, raise your hand if you've looked at a town zoning code? I think Jesse knows it the best, but the code is very long and complicated and has been kind of incrementally added to. And with all of this, not only are we really looking at implementing those incentives and things identified in the community plan, but also how do we make it more clear and concise and reduce inconsistencies and overlapping things just so it can really be that most clear reflection of our values as possible. So it's going to be a long process working through this, but we're really excited to really be rolling up our sleeves and getting into it right now. So at the same time, we're also doing the 5-year strategies. I'll turn it over to Erin to explain.
We're gonna do this a little bit through kind of examples. The idea is to expand, diversify, and distribute community housing. For the first part of this process, we're reviewing and analyzing. We're looking at our existing programs. Like I said, we've been doing this a long time. I think our first active step into affordable housing was in 19. Who do we serve currently? What is our portfolio? What are the details of those units? Are we missing a portion of our workforce and or population? Yeah, from the amount of analysis and review that I've done independently over the past 3 years, like I really see a shortcoming in how we handle housing for our seniors. Where do people go when you can't shovel anymore? Where do people go when you need to be in a tighter community? Like those kind of things, meaning physically tighter community. I think we've got amazing supports as we are. And then from January through May, we'll start working on strategy development. Community space is obviously an important part of that is today. Like, let's hash it out. Let's talk about what this definition is. We'll work through some market analyses to understand, like, what is the market producing? What are the price points of getting you into the market? And how does that play out when we're talking about community serving commercial? If we know what the price is to buy a restaurant space or to rent a small office space in town, to deliver a service that would be beneficial to community, what is that gap between what the market is doing versus what local businesses can support? It's a nebulous question. There's as many business plans out there as there are businesses. And so it's a little bit different from the residential side where the federal government gives us some general guidance. 30% of your costs should be about where it's housing. So we'll be working through that. We'll be doing a lot of conversations with architects, developers, businesses through that process as well. Working on strategy over the same period of time, doing these through kind of town council sessions and certainly noticing the community so you can come and participate. So here's our examples in terms of like what we talk about, how regulatory environment shapes what happens in the market. ADUs, in my mind, are a really interesting space that we can play in. Like I've said, the calculus is flipped on those, where it costs between $600,000 and $800,000 to build an ADU, depending on how you appoint it, how fancy you want your garage, what kind of finishes you put in there. There is very little space to make money on those. Like when you also then, if you're wanting to make money on the ADU, get alone if you want somebody in your backyard. So what are the things we can do in the zoning code that makes that attractive to somebody? What can we change? What do we have in a regulatory environment that we can offer up and say, hey, we'll give you this. Does this make this more enticing to you? And then you can give the community an ADU that can be rented to a local workforce person, and then dive into what are those details on that deed restriction. Should we be changing what we've done in the past or where we are currently? Will it be helpful to improve our streamline our processes to make this a little bit easier? And that conversation comes from builders and architects to hear what we hear back from the community that have been canvassed or encouraged to do an ADU and didn't, or did, and what was their experience. From the community spaces strategy, we're also talking we'll be looking at what type of deed restriction. As I mentioned, we're talking about possibly doing pre-approved building plans. And so we've gone after some grant dollars that will that grease the skids a little bit. Like if you can just be like, sweet, I don't have to spend this 20 grand, this 30 grand to have somebody design this building for me. What else? What are the carrots and sticks we can use to make this work? On the community serving commercial. Oh, sorry.
Has that been tried? Sure.
Yep. Yeah.
What are the results over the so far?
The market really drives the answer. The more aggressive the market has been, the higher price point for homes, the more aggressive your strategies have to be. And so I am shocked at and certainly the state is pushing ADUs right now on a big front. And so in some communities, they're getting much more traction. You're seeing that happen in Denver, you're seeing it happen in Grand Junction, where you're seeing construction costs are a little bit lower, land costs are a little bit lower. And so they're getting more churn out. Communities that have already had ADU programs that have been working on previous market assumptions, like early 2000s market assumptions, are grinding to a halt. And so places like Breckenridge, certainly we are looking at it differently. I'm trying to think of the other ski towns that have reached out to me recently and said, what are you guys doing? And are you changing your mind? We're not getting ADUs. And when we do get them, they're not being rented, or they're being rented for $6,000 a month.
I would just note real quick, the places where they're gaining traction, they're not restricted. The use isn't restricted. So in Denver, you can build an ADU. You don't have to rent it out. You can use it as your it's better or have friends stay there. And that's a difference, I think, for us that makes it even more challenging. Because we would have people build ADUs all day long if it was just an extra. It's really that expectation, which is important.
And so the goal, like how you structure your incentive programs and regulations is really driven by your local market. In the Front Range and in Grand Junction, and like supply is really a huge part of the solution. Like build more housing units, like we've been behind for 30 years. So just start putting units on the market. Up here, that doesn't really work for us. Like the more units we put on the market that are unrestricted, there's just an unlimited number of second home buyers and investors that are happy to purchase those units, especially if they're at relatively affordable rates. And so some local control on those units is what helps them serve us. Our market is more broken than other places. The forces on our market are more extreme.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was just gonna say, in Frisco, they recently did the pre-approved building permits, so they have like 4 different. They're full on single family homes, put it there, you know, you go pick them up at the building department instead of paying the construction. Yeah.
Ferguson County did recently as well.
Yeah.
We're actually applying for a grant right now from the state to do that. We're excited for that opportunity.
It might be a requirement in some parts of California, like you have to have them available for people.
Yeah, that's a supply side market, unless you get to places like Hollywood, San Francisco, where the market is just booked. You know, and so we see like we made such great progress with ADUs in the 90s. We've got the bulk of our units at that point. Now the rate has trickled to 1 or 2 a year. And so they currently make up 1/3 of our restricted units. We have almost 100 of them in town. That's amazing. You know, but they're just not coming out like they used to. What can we do to move it along?
And are they using them for the purpose they were supposed to?
If
That's
you
the
know
big
any that are
deal.
not, please send them our way and we will run compliance on them and move them towards a lease. And we've had 4 conversations over the past 2 months with ADU owners that we have discovered or the community has reported to us and said, no one has ever lived here. Or that we observe a lockbox on that clearly is indicative of probably not someone living there full time. And so compliance, and another nice word is preservation, is important in these programs. Right? So when you say zone it like you mean it, I also say fund it like you mean it. Like those are the 2 important things, regulated and funded to match your priorities.
So similarly, oh gosh, sorry, that keeps jumping ahead. Similarly on the commercial community spaces strategy. An example from the community plan is it identified really want to retain and facilitate more community serving commercial spaces on Bellevue. So in our zoning code update, that could look like some of those incentives and tools identified in the plan, allowing an increased height of a 3rd story to a 4th story in exchange for % of community serving commercial space, and also looking at improving our definitions and use tables and things like that are really important to shaping the future of Bellevue, like allowing certain things, certain types of uses, say like restaurants or things like that on Bellevue could really influence and change what that area turns into in the future. Like the gentrification is exactly the right word, and it could lead to really change of uses into more restaurants and things like that, but there's this insatiable desire over that would kind of outcompete those commercial businesses that we really want to retain. But at the same time, we really need a strategy to help support any regulatory tools. And that really starts with what we're going to start today of defining what is community serving commercial. We want to incentivize space for that, but what do we then prioritize within that space? And it's such a broad definition. We have a working start, and we really want to start with all the brain power in this room today to start to wrap our arms around that. And then are there other sorts of strategies to think about, like incubator space, business support programs, and things that we could really start to work on and plan for in the future? And the town has dabbled in this in the past. We have a lot of facilities. We rent out to a lot of different organizations and businesses, from, you know, the Paragon Art Gallery is a great example, or different nonprofits or things like that. And how can we leverage those sorts of tools to help with that? So as Erin mentioned earlier, we've been working on housing for decades now, and I think a lot of folks in this room were involved in those early conversations, and it's really evolved over time. And the housing strategy will really look at how do we evaluate our needs and what we have and fine tune, but we're just starting the journey here on community spaces. So how do we even start to just define it as the first step? And that's going to be a big focus of that 5-year strategy. Any questions on an example before we get into the discussion? Okay.
Well, and as we've talked about, we've got a small group here. We just want to keep this discussion pretty free flowing and keep the funnel wide open at this point on the working definition that you see. It'll be up on the board here and behind you. If there are things that you want to call out on that immediately, let's do it. But I think what we've heard about too is it's a lot easier sometimes to enter into this discussion, thinking about specific types of places, some specific examples. So let's keep everything on the table and really start with the premise. I think Erin described it really well, is that, you know, the free market answer is luxury right now. And the barrier to entry into this market is probably the biggest challenge. So that's where some incentives can come in. And the question for us is, what do we get for those incentives? What does the community want to protect? What are we afraid of losing? And how do we define community space so that we can develop criteria that align with our values and inform decision making? So with that premise, we can start by, you know, any questions, comments,
Can you
thoughts?
read it? It's pretty small. to read
Yes,
From here.
yeah,
I have 2 little tiny edits. It's just
yeah.
me, I mean, I think technically the definition can't have community spaces, community or spaces in it. So I think if it's just local serving businesses that foster connection, and you get rid of those first 2 words and you get rid of community, then it's a more efficient definition just to start with.
I like it. So with that, I'll read it. And it's already changed from what we read earlier. So, and correct me if I get it wrong, local serving businesses that foster nonprofits, services and gathering places that meet everyday needs.
I think you just do local serving businesses, nonprofits, services and gathering places that meet everyday needs and foster connection.
Yeah, nice.
I like saving it.
Yeah, excellent.
Discussion over.
So what other thoughts? What stands out either on the definition or the actual types of spaces that are good examples or things that we really want to protect?
I feel like it should have the word public in it, the general public. It's like, they're not membership-based businesses or whatever that would be. Like, I'm thinking the country club, but obviously that's not gonna be on Bellevue.
But understandably so,
Right, they could,
you
they
know,
could have
a
a,
private membership only foo-foo place.
It should be in the definition.
Would it be possible to pull up the prior definition again? On the big screen?
Thanks.
One question I have is, what's the difference between businesses and services?
And services could also be provided by local nonprofits or the government. And so are we missing public spaces to deliver services? Is a nonprofit missing a space to deliver services, I think.
Right.
Looking back in the past, I don't know, maybe 8 months of council meetings. Certainly the request for senior sentiments, certainly the concern for loss for a weight room. Like those kind of things. So those are just 2 examples that have come in front of our council with members of the community saying, there isn't a space for this.
Yeah.
You know, people suggesting, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had more opportunities for mental health services? That could be ran by a government, a nonprofit, by a private member of the community that does sliding scale services. That really trying to keep it open. Acknowledging there are a variety of entities that can provide this thing. And what this thing is. You know, I've got 3 teenage boys, a barber shop is on that list. That's a private endeavor. They're serving whoever needs one. You know, that like all the way up to crisis moments. You know, in my mind, I think of when I get a call from somebody who's in an unsafe domestic situation, I have nowhere to send them other than a hotel. Like, so it could be anywhere in there, a moment of getting yourself looking nice to like someplace you need to go for safety.
On that point, the follow-up, I mean, we do have a lot of these connections already. I mean, Project Hope is that exactly what, and they have a whole network of places to send people that include hotels, include people's houses, and so a way of like understanding the services that we already have and how to connect people to them instead of continuing to kind of push for things that are being answered by our community already as their need or reinventing.
Yeah.
Maybe the word services addresses like non-commerce based spaces. Like where somebody's not paying for something, but they're being provided.
Would it come?
So maybe like the library would be a non-commerce based service.
Or kind of like the Malarkey as well. Sure, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would you consider childcare, I would consider childcare a service,
You're right.
which you would be paid for, so I don't know if there would be commerce there.
I mean, in
And
our
hospital, hospital is another, or like clinic, although there's money changing hands, it is a service.
Right. I think maybe I'm thinking of like, we all pay taxes to go towards those services, but we're not gonna, it's $50, you
Right.
pay $50, you've given me a product or service.
I was, two experiences I've noticed this summer. Two, commercial service providers, a plumber, a sheet metal shop in town. We've lost both of those. There are two aspects of that I think are of concern. One, two locals who worked these businesses for decades, unable to transfer the business to someone new who could use the same space. The second aspect of that is that those local I think of those as services, commercial services. We're able to provide the kinds of services that locals need the most, which we can't get readily anymore because so many people are focused on big houses. So to me, the local serving commercial and retail businesses, there's a difference there. I think there's a need to include both. And I think with the commercial services business, we've got a building, I think it's still on the market, on 3rd Street. It was the Pioneer Plumbing at, it's on the market, I think $850 is what it's being marketed at. And who can afford to buy that? So somehow we've got to come up with in this dimension incentives for the owner of that building to say, okay, I'll sell that for a lot less to a local. So we can keep a local plumber in here and serve the locals. And what can that incentive be? And obviously the first answer is money, but my premise on this, if I understand it correctly, we don't have money. So we're kind of focusing on incentives here, but.
I'd like to kind of jump on that some more too, Jim, because I think I agree with you that all the C-zone uses are actually community serving uses and we need to preserve them, plumbers, sheet metal people, electricians. One of the things I see that needs to be thought about with this idea is potentially limiting in a way to implement it or have a way to create community serving spaces is in sizes. So if we can have an idea of requiring a certain amount of smaller size spaces that a local could afford, right? So not these big commercial spaces on the corner that would invite a bigger tenant, but smaller scale tenants. So a smaller scale mom and pop operation could come in. And so that's how I see this zone having an opportunity to define a certain amount of spaces, maybe a 1 or 2 car garage size space, 200 to 400 square feet is something that's more affordable for a public general person local to participate in. So that's one, I think that we might think about including the word size in this definition, somehow smaller scale or something that speaks to that.
I think in housing too.
Yeah.
It's
Size matters.
And it's
Yeah.
also how we've seen some of our newer locally owned restaurants come in, like Plantain Tree. They started as a food truck, they started as a food cart, became a food truck. And then eventually were able to have their own sized restaurant through that channel. And so adding that kind of growth in the commercial sector as well. Telluride is trying to pass a ballot measure this year where any project over $10 million has to get voter approval. And so something along those lines with community spaces where if there is like a big project happening in town, it must be approved by all of town. I don't know exactly what scale, because we're not Telluride, so $10 million might not hit the things that we have some anxiety about, but along those lines of potential inclusion of the community and the decisions going forward.
So I love how Jim brought up those examples of the plumber and sheet metal. What are other, like, what is an everyday need for our community to function? What are some examples of that?
Physical therapist.
Caregiver. Seeing now caregivers is a huge need because people are getting older and they need help. And we don't have any like place to go for friends that we want to stay in the community, but that actually need daily help.
Great example. Yeah, Dan, Claire.
Can I just add a little tack on to some of these questions that might help us
Yeah.
understand like what services we need that we don't have here? Like, what do you drive to Gunnison? What do you drive to Slider or Montrose? To help us think about that. Like, what are those everyday needs that aren't met?
Or is there something that used to be here that no longer is? That you just can't find, or you turn to the internet, or you drive really far to go to, yeah. Same
Well,
with
but
that,
we've
but-
tried to stop big box places. We've tried to stop Home Depot up here or Lowe's up here or anything like that. We don't really want them up here. So, yeah, you're driving to Montrose or you're driving to Gunnison.
I mean, like Handworks is like the small box. It's the general store. That's where I go to get card or wrapping paper or things like that. Like places like that. Yeah, just a little thing, like the everyday items.
Or like an accessible co-working space, like the library gets like inundated in the middle of the summer. There is a co-working space, but it's kind of expensive and it's not the best setup and it's private. And, you know, so something like that, a place for people to go and work communally.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, like a maker's space for people who have tiny little affordable houses that don't have garages or any space to do anything but live.
I wouldn't put this as a need that we're not necessarily serving, but I do want to highlight it as a foundation of our community that we've got is, you know, our arts and culture spaces, like the radio station, you know, like public serving arts spaces that really foster a display venue for local artists.
And there's a community of artists on Bellevue who like once a month, I think, have been having art markets, and there's like a little flyer you get, and you can go to all their different studios all over Bellevue. And so it's about when the community makes the move towards that, about how we can serve that, because maybe we don't need a space for that, but they need help promoting it, and they need, you know, so there's a level of that. Instead of creating a whole new space for something, how do you make sure that it works for how the people are?
And there's an open house for that particular group this Saturday, just FYI.
Well, I think Glo said it on the other end, but preserving childcare and or improving childcare in north of the valley and commercial kitchens. I don't think there's a commercial kitchen anywhere in the valley.
I think I'd love to just tack on to that, though.
Well, one that you can use.
Right, yeah, right, like it's a shared community
I
kitchen.
mean, Josephine's trying to sell hers, so if anybody wants to buy it, there we go.
Go, Dara.
And that is the main thing on the Center for the Arts plan for the second building, is the commercial kitchen.
On the daycare side, I'd definitely add infant care. It's a target that doesn't currently exist up here. I think I'd put a dentist, the doctor's office on there. Think of things that like if they left here and now you're having to drive to Gunnison for it. For me, like gear repair, being able to drop something off at function before fashion is super valuable. Means I don't have to throw my jacket away or ship it somewhere to get fixed. Ace, for God's sakes. Like, can you imagine if Ace went away? Like, what would the kids eat? They're like, then where do you get a screwdriver? Like, those are things that I feel like are mainstays, like, as the value of land goes up, the opportunity to sell to a different user goes up. You know, yes, it's a gas station, so it's pretty well anchored. Yes, they're probably doing pretty well because they're the one game in the town. But when we think about, I think I'd reverse your suggestion of what do you go to Montrose for versus what do you have to go to Gunnison for now, or what would you hate to have to go to Gunnison for?
You also raise a good point, and it goes back to, I don't think I said, it has to do with also aligning with who we are in our markets. We can say we don't allow Home Depot. Home Depot doesn't have a market here. They would go out of business in a week because Ace is very well aligned with, right? I mean, at a certain point, they get on my, takes me a minute to get to Ace and get the bolt that I forgot this morning. And I make 10 trips to Ace. I don't do that for Home Depot. There's not a market for it. I think there is, what do we go to Gunnison for? What do we go to Montrose for? Interesting, but what is it that we need here? And I think conversations of, you know, caregivers, a conversation of childcare, those are really good conversations because there is a fine line between what we need and what we would like to see here. A sheet metal worker. Okay, at a certain point, are we then fostering somebody who is having other issues because they can't manage a business here? Medical, healthcare, services, those are wonderful opportunities. The definition we're starting with is community serving spaces. Those are, to me, those are very clearly community serving spaces. A plumber, because we have to go to Riverland for a plumber, that's not a community serving. But I do agree with the point of caregivers. That is essential for us to keep our community healthy, vibrant, sustained. That's a really good component. I mean, it's there. Is it clear enough? Local serving businesses, profit services, gathering places. That there's a very interesting underlying essence of who we are in that.
Well, and I want to push on that one a little bit too, because I think it gets to, you know, both sides of the coin that we're hearing on defining services. You know, on the one hand, it's very much those, you know, nonprofit essential health and human services. But then on the other hand, it's also some of those commercial services that prevent you from having to get a plumber or an electrician coming in from Montrose that then creates that impact to the roadway and, you know, all the additional miles traveled. So what I'm hearing from this group is services is really both.
We've been obviously talking about this internally for a long time. It's like ginning ideas for a long time, and I feel like an analogy is like consider town or the North Valley a cruise ship. We're all on it together, right? What are the things that absolutely should be on that cruise ship for services, commercial support, whether it's medical, others, and what are the things it's okay to pull into port and deal with? And consider Gunnison Port, consider Montrose Port. Sometimes the ports are smaller, sometimes they're bigger and have more services.
Yeah.
And like, how do we populate our ship and what do we protect on our ship?
One service that I still utilize from Western after being a master's student there is, oh gosh, Mountaineer Pursuits, Western Pursuit. Yeah, basically their gear library that you can rent at a really reasonable rate, pretty much anything you need, so that it gives better access to all of these outdoor opportunities without having to invest in like a paddleboard or like, you know, whitewater equipment or whatever. It might be something that we could, but I have to drive to Gunnison for it, so, yeah.
You could take the bus to Gunnison though. I mean, I think that really focusing on things that we need from Gunnison or don't need from Gunnison. I mean, we are not an insular community. We're an island, right? When the bridge goes out and these other things go out, we lose our services. So it doesn't take that much to imagine what we need, because we've all experienced that. We've gone through COVID where we wish we had X, Y, and Z. We realized that the food trucks are the only thing that bring our food. So without that, how do we go forward, you know? And I think it would be interesting to be able to support the Mountaineer Gear program so that more people could use it instead of reinventing the wheel just down the road. Because even though it sucks to have to drive to Gunnison for things, we don't live in Crested Butte without being aware of that. And if we're continuing to support more and more insular instead of like larger community activity, I don't think that that's going to accomplish our goals either.
That something like that might seems a little bit like a low-hanging fruit, where maybe you don't need the extent of the gear that they have at Western Pursuits. But you know, to have it here so that somebody locally could just go for it, and then because it's not always the easiest to take a paddleboard on the bus. So
I mean, when the library already brings stuff up and down Valley, you know, using those courier services. We used to have a nurse from Health and Human Services come and hang out at Town Hall once a week. And so then it's not like a new thing. It's just expanding its access and providing a space where that can exist instead of creating a whole new thing.
Well, and being my new demographic that I am, you know, I know you guys, I'm pretty sure the town does, helps with the senior van, which is huge. And it's starting to get even more as some of us age, you know, rides to Montrose, get eye shots. You know, things like that are small things, but that really helps to have, you know, a van that takes 4 people instead of 4 different cars that go. And I shocked myself just 3 weeks ago on a Wednesday afternoon, driving from Gunnison to here at 5:15 to 5:45. I counted the number of cars passing me going south. You guys, can you take a guess the number of cars that might have gone south in that half an hour?
I did, I'm one of them.
533 cars. I was like blown away. Cause I did it like a year ago, it was 472, so I thought, whoa, this year.
Wow.
So 533 cars.
Oh my God.
And that's from Gunnison City Market or to the Old Town Inn,
Wow.
you know.
Wow.
That just blows me away. We have got to do something about what people are doing in the way of driving cars. We're talking about driving cars here. There's pedestrians. How do we change that? That's insane to me.
Well, I like them are the trades.
Yeah,
Some of them can go into Montrose and Delta and Grand Junction.
Correct. Yeah,
Exactly
a
right.
lot of them are passenger cars with one person.
Yeah.
Well, and Chloe, I think that's a really good example of how interconnected all of this stuff is. If you can house more people locally, so they're not commuting from Gunnison every day, that's the housing piece. If you can have, you know, some commercial services where your trades don't have to come from Gunnison or beyond, that reduces some cars. So it's all interconnected to create that
Yeah,
intensity.
absolutely.
Yeah, you're right on.
I think that's it. Both are very interesting points. I think we're not insular. And I think it's sometimes that we forget that. Okay, I come from a very large metropolitan area. My mother used to live less than 7 miles from me. Normally it would take me 45 minutes to drive to her house. Here, we say, I can't believe you go to Gunnison. It is 30 miles away. It is, I walk down, get on the bus, I sleep all the way to the I work out, I go to the gym, I do what I need to, I get back on the bus and I come back, and I've had less of a commute time than I do in a metropolitan area. So I do think it's an interesting conversation, to your point, of proximity, availability. I love the analogy of the cruise ship. What do we need to have here? I do think senior care you need here. There's proximity, there is an urgency, right? What do we need in terms of an amazing swimming pool? That pool in Gunnison is a joy. Nobody's ever there. I get to swim for an hour in a heated pool right? And all I gotta do is get on a bus. So I think the local serving spaces, there is a component of proximity and urgency that we have to take into effect. Because I do agree, we are not insular. We are a part of Crescent, like or not. And your point of the senior bus, it takes you to trailheads. They will come to, all the way to Granite and pick you up and drive you and your hiking crew back. Are you kidding me? Name another place in the world that does that. I mean,
Takes you to vineyards and Hotchkiss. Woo, yeah.
my wife called it, no, it's free. All we want you to do is give us the bug sandwich from the local deli now.
I might add frequency to your list, that if it's something you need quarterly, is that big of a deal?
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Daily or
Yeah.
weekly is the.
you know, but when we talk about daily services, weekly services, post offices, you know, the idea of being able to grab lunch for less than $30, like things that, like, quarterly, one would presume you go to Gunnison Evers quarterly. You know, but the idea of, as you put it, like, the fact that GVH has office hours at the north end of the valley and has expanded those office hours, you know, that's super helpful. And so what are the resources that we can draw up to us instead of inventing the wheel, as well as what do we have to preserve here?
And I feel like there's a strong connection to partnerships that foster community connection and partnerships, because, you know, we're not insular, but.
Yeah, I see along the lines of what a lot of you are saying, I see the opportunity to kind of map this out on a need versus, like resource demand kind of plot chart of like, how easy would it be to create this kind of a space? And how high is the need, you know, and maybe that high is, you know, like how high is the need is like frequency and or, you know, community demand or, you know, in how intrinsic it is to our ability to like function as a community. But you know, because yeah, if it's a rec center with like a big pool, you know, that's a much higher price point and that's a much bigger resource demand. But if it's like, you know, like, taking care that you've already got it in Gunnison and just providing a space for people to access it here, then maybe the actual resource demand to make that happen is lower. And so, yeah.
I'm trying to think of framework too. How do you think about this? But I think health is just such a broad bucket, because you've got physical health, mental health, emotional health. I could throw in spiritual health, relational health. But you know, then there's just the relationship connection piece. The one thing that I love is the British or English concept of the public house. In our public house, maybe is a problem. But
Expensive.
you know, the house where you go to connect with your friends, and it's getting harder and harder to do that. I mean, coffee shops is one, but we probably need a pub that's accessible to all. I don't know.
Or a meeting room, not necessarily a pub.
The last one is, you know, there is the concept of the community center where a lot can go on in, and maybe they're big and expensive, and maybe we have lots of little community spaces.
Yeah, when I think of the common space, that community space, it's like where you can pass through, where your kids can be at the same time, and then around you while you're hanging out, and it doesn't require reserving room. You know, that inform, there's a component of, I feel like there's a loss of informal connecting places. You know, obviously the brick patio is one that people think about a lot when you think of like, you will just meet people there if you go at this time. And so where are those other places? Certainly trailheads, you know, that's great. But where is that flexible space?
And I think that brings up the point of our streets. Our streets in Crested Butte are places where you run into people. You have to plan an extra 5 minutes if you're walking somewhere, because you will stop and have a conversation.
In the thought.
And
So you ran to one person?
you know,
You knocked them down when you ran in.
and they're public spaces that belong to all of us, that we are all paying for and we are all creating, and that is a huge opportunity for a community hub and gathering spaces and to make those, more accessible, more people know that they can use them. I think our streets are a huge opportunity for these community gathering spaces.
Well, the benches are used a lot. I know the museum benches, 2 benches, almost always have 1 or 2 people on them.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly because they're right across from Camp 4 Roomers.
Yeah.
They're also
So they go get their coffee and they come sit in the sun and yeah, let's just gab for, particularly during the off season too. When people are really willing to sit and talk rather than, hey, bye, how are you? I got a meeting in 3 minutes,
So like there-
This is huge.
And there's the food, the Colombian food truck at the 4-way. Like that's a great place where you could just put down a park bench. And it would be like a bench and an umbrella would like make that a space to hang out instead of just like a blazing hot paved place in the sun.
Folding
Like,
chair.
wait for your tacos and then like retreat to the shade.
Right there at the 4-way though with the visitor center, there's those 2 benches in the shade.
There's a good spot.
But so maybe Pepitos or whatever, they move a little closer to those benches. They don't park 3 parking
They have
spaces
to
away.
park there.
Yeah, for access to power.
Electricity.
Yeah.
And what does that look like in the winter? How do these transform once it's cold?
That's a big one.
And stuff, and where do people go
plowing.
then? And plowing. And
That's what we need a pub for. Which is not a bar. It's different.
It's a community space, I'd say, rather than.
Yeah.
Does some of that occur as society evolves and changes? And, in town, we have the halls, right? I mean, the old buildings upstairs, they had the halls and they had dances and they had this. We don't have that now. I mean. We
The
had-
fraternal orders,
Right.
The parish hall.
We had,
We do polka in the parish hall.
yeah.
we did, there were discos on Elm. Not anymore. So does some of this change and does the definition change over time? I agree with you, your point. We have the center, we have the parish hall, there aren't a lot of spaces like that anymore. Are those things that we're evolving back into? Wouldn't it be nice? Try and find your hockey banquet venue. Not a lot of them.
I mean, I think we're not giving ourselves enough credit. There are spaces. It's how do we retain them? How do we make sure that our community knows that they can access them? How do we make it more affordable to access them? How do we make them safer? And those kind of ideas, because we have a fair amount, and the more we use them, the more people will recognize that as a potential to grow and to create more.
I feel like the Aldo deck is such a good example of what John was saying of a gathering space, and I would be so sad to see that not exist on Oak Avenue. It just brings such an energy, even if I'm not going out for a beer, walking or biking by it, and that's something Crested, it's so impressive.
Well, when I do my tours, I say what a benefit getting the Forest Queen on its property. Because Kachiver's got 3 extra feet of that patio. And, I tell people, you're out on a bike ride for 6 hours, you're out rafting for 8 hours, you're out in the sun. What do you want? A shady place for a beer, and Kachiver's has really stepped up with making that a really nice patio with the door right there to go straight into the bar rather than coming out to the street and back around, so they've gotten lucky.
A shady place for shady people.
That's the soup signs.
I wonder if there's a need for youth too, just like seniors. When I was growing up here, we had the teen center, which was a terrible name, but it was in the basement of the Forest Service building on First Street. We had foosball and ping pong and stereo. We didn't have our space to go hang out at. I think they were right around.
Which was nice. Yeah. But isn't that a great idea too? It seems great thought, John.
We gotta get a different name, but a safe place for healthy connection.
We're on a teen center. They are teens.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, we'd ride the buses. That was our safe place, indoor place to hang out.
Yeah.
And we would just ride, and we just ride the buses around and around and around. We'll take cruising.
Yeah.
There's an opportunity on the radar, town coming up with the fire station, fire department moving and the fire department building is, gonna be reimagined. And how it could
Yeah.
benefit our town and fit into community serving spaces and mixed use of different things that are needed, so. That, in my mind, that building may not actually be here in the future, because, as an architect, I understand the enormous, push it would take to turn it into a public use building. And meet all the codes and requirements, even a base level building would be hugely expensive to redo that building, so. In my mind, I'm imagining that whole space getting redone in a new way. But thinking about how it could benefit not only community serving spaces, but more.
I will say, it already is a community serving space, so, you know, the pump room up above, you know, is like such a mecca for dance. You know, and probably.
And events you can rent
Yeah.
that, as long as you're not doing it at the same time as the dancers are there.
Mhm.
You know, which can be difficult sometimes to schedule, but nonetheless.
Sure, and it's super affordable to rent and.
It's super important to preserve what works there
That's.
and what's needed there.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So as long as, if that building goes away because of the maintenance costs and stuff, just making sure that that space is retained. Because it's so critical to something that's so foundational in the community and so much more.
Yeah.
You know what a good indication of the best community serving spaces might be is how we vote in the paper, a favorite bike shop, a favorite coffee shop. It's a pretty good indication of what's serving the community pretty well. For me, like handlebar bikes is kind of the quintessential community serving business. I don't know if everybody would agree with that or not, but kids are in there getting skateboards and helmets, and it's right by the skateboard park. And I don't know.
I put Mikey's on that list too.
Mikey's, oh yeah.
The fact that you can get a slice for under a few bucks, like.
So part of it is just ensuring that the ones that are working survive.
Yeah.
So instead of having great new ones.
Yes. Yeah,
Boston would support those.
and like, I mean, the skate park is on that list too, you know, of course,
Yeah.
and the ice rink, and, yeah.
And part of the reason that handlebars moved many times, but part of the reason that handlebar and Mikey's are so essential for our community is because they are around that community serving space that is used for so many things and can continue to kind of have that reliability of, kids are gonna come here and skate, so of course they're gonna come and get their bikes and their pads, and of course they're gonna want pizza. And it allows that to continue, which it wouldn't if our skate park was falling apart.
Well, it's a little ecosystem kind of.
Yes.
And I think that there's opportunities kind of all across town, like the four-way is also kind of its own ecosystem, you know, where that's a community serving place, and that's why some of those things work there. You know, and I think, you know, our art markets and our farmers markets on Elk Avenue are the ecosystem response to that kind of commercial zone as well.
Are there other things we haven't touched on yet that you think would really need to be on that cruise ship? Or feel like they're on the cruise ship today that you're afraid of losing?
I can think of some like low priority ones, like electronic repair. We have a laundromat. I think it's pretty safe, but
But it's on the way.
yeah.
It's a big deal.
But I don't know if it's on Rumble's list.
Yes, they're keeping
They're
it.
keeping
I've talked to them.
But all that being said.
It makes a lot of money, that laundromat. It should, it's expensive. as
I don't
heck.
know if you've tried, but it's really hard to use it because so many of our cleaners use it for all of their laundry. That if you're just a person that wants to like do a load of laundry, sometimes in like the heat of the summer or like middle of winter, you're sitting there waiting.
It's almost like timing, you know, when you're in a big city, you don't wanna be driving between 3 and 6 and 7 and 9. But at the laundromat, there's a certain time.
I don't know where it is.
Yes, it is.
I would
Dentist.
I feel like it would be interesting on that vein is like, there used to be a bunch of dentists in town, right? And there's some in CB South now, and they've kind of moved out of town, so kind of identifying why it doesn't work to have a dentist in the town of Crested Butte, because we've had them over the years, and I feel like it's
Rare.
I think we have that. Isn't Seacrest still?
they're just dentists that don't take.
He's telling you.
they're literally 3 times the cost of anywhere else. Like, I mean, I go to Glenwood Springs because like the same service is literally 3 times
Yeah.
here as it is there.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't know what we can do about that. Like, I mean, I guess that's the market where they know that people have to go here, but they're pricing out their locals, I feel like.
Oh, so are the restaurants.
Totally.
I mean, they're 3 times the price of
Yeah.
anything you ever would imagine.
I might include a space for learning. And it could be to learn the best of one on the internet, but it could be that there's a way for people to continue learning. That you're always growing, you're thriving, you're learning.
I like that you brought that up. I think that a space without internet is good.
Daily dose.
The black
That's
box.
right. Miles, I would add a veterinarian to the list too.
Good call.
This is glaringly obvious, but either of the grocery stores. I was gonna mention that as well.
Groceries.
Yeah, probably isn't going where I don't know that I would call it a community serving business because it is so expensive.
It's
Like,
okay.
depends on the time of year. Big factor, I think about that as.
So the health food stores,
Just
it's expensive, but you see a lot of people in there.
And the
Taking
bench,
a bowl of soup.
the benches out front, yeah.
I like having the movie theater, it's been a lot to happen, but
Is it for sale?
it's for sale.
The whole building
The
is.
whole building
It
is.
has been.
And they actually went to the other businesses and said, can we all get together and buy it? And it was, no.
They're still working really hard to figure that out, but that's the amenity that I think is really critical for community, together.
And we got that scene, one thing,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the film festival starts today.
Yeah.
FYI.
Especially those.
Yeah, I'm going to Anne's Days and all this.
What else are we missing that needs to be on the cruise ship?
It's a big
Is
It's a big ship.
It's a big ship. And it goes to port. too.
I guess
This for too long.
you gotta steer the ship, so like, we're lucky to have like the town spaces that we do, that, we're really. We can do what we're doing here today. And, gather and.
We got just everything to take care of our homes. Take care of our ship.
Yeah, exactly.
And all the things you were mentioning,
The churches.
mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, all those things that are so important for us to have such a vibrant life, which we do in this community.
We talked about our gear.
It's spoken with like plumbers and sheet metal and electricians and like, is it so bad to be in Riverland and whatnot? And I see that, I would say that having the paint shop in town, even though it can be expensive. When we were painting our house, Kim, she knew, we were going for a couple colors and she was like, well, your neighbors are actually painting their house and they're painting it this color, so don't go with that. And then, I was able to ride back and forth with swatches and having that, that right there was like really, really awesome amenity and with those other shops as well. Like, yes, people can go to Riverland, it's inevitable, but as much as we can, if we can maintain that corridor,
Help our businesses survive.
yeah.
Some people say, oh, well, city market's a lot cheaper than up here. Yeah, but Stephanie, they're my friends.
Yeah.
I want them to be successful.
It's a little small thing, but I've heard a couple people mention, I love, spaces like Fisters for cards and stuff like that, but I also love spaces where I can get local art as gifts for people. And I know, I think Anna mentioned, the Bellevue where people have a physical space, but for people that don't have a physical space that maybe make stuff at home, I love the opportunities like the Paragon gives. And then also like Rumors or Resilient Threads, just having local artists in their space. I do love that because that's something, and is it a need? Like, I don't have to have that, but like, I do love because then those artists have an outlet for what they're doing.
Or even like arts market spaces, like
Exactly.
during the farmer's market, like the parking lot or even just the farmer's market in itself, like those are both.
Yeah.
And like around Christmas, they do that in the center, but like having more of those opportunities, so you don't just like, you miss one day, cause you're doing all the other million things to survive here, you miss it, so having a more reliable. place-
Consistent.
Consistent.
Want to piggyback on that and like art supply stores for people who are making fine art. We don't have like Sisters does not carry fine art.
No face
Grade
paint.
supplies.
No face paint. Where I go.
No, the artists and communities you live here and are making stuff, it'd be nice if you didn't have to buy everything on the internet and like keep more money here.
Yeah, and that's the kind of local incubator cycle where if you can stimulate that, it just, recirculates in the community too.
Or
Hopefully.
maybe along the lines of like childcare, but like children's supply stores. Does that make sense? Very specific. That needs to be especially out there, but where you can go buy a stroller or. Children's clothes.
I mean, those spaces go out of business. They try all the time, then they go out of business. It's just,
I really missed it inside of that. Yeah, I guess that's kind of also, I don't think they close. Sorry.
Some trades around might be a more formal or established apprentice program. Where, young folks who don't want to take the college track, just want to go into the trades and learn trade and know well, but. It's happening, and I see young kids working at the weld shop and.
I think there's a strong program through the Gunnison High School.
There is.
Yeah. That.
None to speak of at our high school.
I was just gonna ask if there was anything, I know Gunnison is huge.
Yeah, they
I
only-
didn't know if
You
there
can
was.
fight Jennifer Reed about that.
Yeah.
John Shaw.
They only,
Fuck.
they only get option, they have no belief.
He was building houses.
Isn't that good?
Bringing back the SOAR program.
The sword, yeah, it's really good.
I'd say another critical community service space, but thankfully we're retaining is the post office. Like. So.
Yeah, what's gonna happen? We got a little extension.
5 years is gonna go fast.
It's 5 years.
Yes,
Well, but the fact that they want such a huge building, please get a grip, you guys.
I don't, only have heard as much about keeping existing businesses in place as incentivizing new community serving spaces. Can that be worked into this somehow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. I think of like Butte Breakers was such a great example of like knowing the need of like a quick grab and go, get something for under $12 is pretty awesome.
And space existed already and just extended, yeah. But how do you incentivize the creation of those new businesses?
Or help them
Without sort of
get started.
playing favorites and you've got free enterprise happening, the market leans toward luxury. So what are the,
I think kids can. Important to answering that. You incentivize part by saying, you're gonna build this big building and building. X number of these spaces have to be 600 square feet or less. That would go a long way towards doing.
just a small size.
Yeah.
And as we've been going, I've been kind of defining services and on one sheet. And I think this point you're bringing up, Jim, is a great one on what incentives, what tools do we have to help our businesses survive? And, obviously, the common denominator is the financial, but I think sizing is something that's really important. Kind of that incubation space where I think restaurants are a great example where are there certain price points that need to be hit and other criteria that level the playing field. So it is, an equal opportunity for everyone who wants to, in good faith, fill that community space. And that the ecosystem idea of incentivizing those ecosystems that multiply the things we want to see more of, whether it's the skate park or farm markets. And, really understanding what we've lost and why can help inform some of the strategies that we bring to bear. And then town-owned spaces, co-ops, we've talked a lot about, the Paragon and Stepping Stones and some of those places that have proven to have stability because they're in a town-owned space. Certainly the town can't own all the spaces, but it is a tool that we have. And then I think the apprentice program idea is another interesting tool that we could bring to help create, you know, some of those spaces that train the members of our community.
think all of that is fun and good, and I think you made a good point by saying this is a discussion for a later date. But all of this requires construction, build, renovation, remodel. This isn't, none of these spaces exist. We've got to build a cruise ship before we can start to put people in it. And we've had a conversation and successful to some extent about deed restricting for ADUs. Is this leading to a conversation that is suggesting what market rents might be and market rent restrictions? So if there were incentives to, and you mentioned, what are we gonna do with the old firehouse? Are there conversations that say, we can offer you these incentives, but the payback is market restrictions? So at the end of the day, and the reason I say this is we did build a building off the alley behind Bellevue. And we built the entire building exactly the way code said. It is of a height of a certain amount, of a square footage of a certain amount, parking spaces of a certain amount, and we pigeonholed this building in. And it was a very good, if you will, own to work, live to work, artists upstairs, galleries downstairs. If there were incentives that said, we can give you a little bit more space, we can give you a little less parking, we can give you a little less, we can incentivize it, but the deed restriction is market rent, right? It comes down to the reason we started the conversation of why a plumber or a sheet metal worker has to leave has to do with the rent. And the rent has to do with what the market drives, and the market is based on what it costs to construct and what it costs to pay taxes and what it costs to blah, blah, blah. If we were to look at these kind of community serving spaces with a similar eye to the way we looked at ADUs and said, you can build this ADU with this deed restriction. What if we can build some of these spaces, we can incentivize it, and your payback is it has to meet market rent? All of these spaces could be more possible if the rent wasn't what our market drives rent to be right now. It is, you started with this conversation, it is very hard to make an ADU affordable. There isn't enough margin there, and if there is a margin there, at the end of the day, I'm just not gonna build. A lot of these community serving spaces are very hard to build and to rent, because either you can get the rent or you have to get it. So maybe, Dara said it, maybe there is a conversation that says, all of these are great, we've identified them. What does it take to make them viable? And I think a lot of what it would take to make them viable is there are incentives to help you build it so that you can rent it to these communities. That's what it's gonna come down to. The cruise ship is a great analogy, but at some point, you've gotta sell tickets to the cruise ship. And if you can't afford it, nothing on the cruise ship makes any sense.
And that's our next step. Right? So that right now we're defining this nebulous concept. Like, what is it that needs to be on that one? And then we already had many of the conversations through the community plan of what are the spaces that we can actually fill up with buildings? What's our build out potential? And so now the question is, what are the tools that we can move into that space? And it's a combination of carrots and sticks. And making sure that whatever it is that we're willing to horse trade to get those deed restricted spaces, whether they're houses or commercial spaces, are market achievable. You know, that what we're saying is, we'll give you X if you give us Y, and X has enough value to get us Y. And so doing the math behind those questions, but within the parameters of what we're willing to give. We're willing to give a third floor on Bellevue. Are we willing to give a second ADU on the back of a property if one is perhaps left market for them to man, woman, cave, vacation, not vacation, rent, do whatever they do with it. And the other one is the deed restricted unit. Like, what do we have to share? What do we have to trade that has value in the current players that play in this market. What we used to have had value when we said, you can do this ADU. And people were like, sweet, I'm gonna do this ADU because it gives me enough money to help pay off my mortgage. That's not of value to people anymore. When your home cost is $5 million, they would rather not have the ADU. They would rather not have something in their yard. They don't need that rental income. Our taps for $30,000 that we give people, also a rounding error in their projects. And so what do we have to trade? We don't have dollars, but we do have setbacks. We have FAR, we have parking. Those are the levers that we can play with, and now we have to understand the math or the modeling behind what is the value that gets us the return in their space. You know, like it's not ours, like we can't just make up a dollar amount and say, oh, we'll give you this if you give us 1 unit. We want to market test this.
And we said it earlier, building that third floor in the cost of the project is something, but it's negligible. On the return on investment, it's huge. And if you get that third floor and it allows you to reduce everyone's rent by a third, that's a value. Because it didn't cost us a third more to build it.
Correct. Like what can we, and I'm gonna betray
We
my
need to make
colleagues.
sure that that happens instead of them just making.
No, and that's the point.
Yeah, that's the point of the zoning code update.
Right,
Is that we're not just.
There's
giving it away.
a market restriction, just like there's a deed restriction, so you get it, but you have to sign to market rent, whatever.
And for me, the new shift, which was always so incredible, it's no longer affordable housing, which is correct, because nothing is affordable really for the lower middle class person to workforce housing. And when it changed to that, I realized we're screwed here because we don't really have affordable housing. And it makes sense to call it workforce because they're the only people that are gonna be able to afford the $3,000 rent a month. That's not affordable. You know, for someone who has 4 jobs and barely making it and has a dog. You know, which makes it also crazy to find a place to live. It's really sad.
And
This has come to this.
the rent factor is a big thing to talk about too, but it also has to do with how our community is shifting out. So as people leave, they need to sell their houses for a higher amount to support them later on in life. And so that's also, I mean, that's why we're losing the trades on Bellevue, is because when they try to shift out and into their next part of life, they cannot sell that to their employee. You know, like at the Old Town Inn, I had conversations with my bosses. They're like, we want you to run this business. I was like, there's no way I would do that because it would cost too much. They wouldn't be able to make any money leaving out. And so there's another level that it's not just rents, it's about how you shift ownership, or, you know, because if I owned a sheet metal place, I'm sure I could pay the rent, but it's how do you get the business? How do you like transfer into that spot while the other person has enough to continue living? Because that's harder and harder to do as a retired person in this community or anywhere.
Well, a lot of our friends are selling because their houses are worth so much more than they ever imagined in their wildest dreams. And they can sell it and go somewhere else and be debt free in their 60s and 70s and make life easier for their daily income.
A good example of a shift in ownership structure, which is the co-op, and like the coffee right now, what Dewey's doing. So I think it's super cool. I think we can learn. He's put in the work to figure out how to do it. And that gives ownership to locals in a local business, right? Which is
Without having to buy the whole thing.
yeah. I think the co-op is worth taking a look at, or maybe figure out how to make it really easy to create co-ops or.
I just think about it, Kate Seeley did the art nest on Elk years ago, 10, 12, 15 years ago. And it was a great idea, and as an artist, you could have a space, a 4x4 space, you could actually have gallery space. It didn't work because of rent. It ultimately, it wasn't that it was necessarily a bad idea, and I'm not saying it was or wasn't, couldn't afford the rent.
It was a great idea.
I think it didn't work because artists can't buy supplies here too.
Wow. And there was a long discussion about, but the point being, it is gonna come back, but it is gonna come back to it, and all of these are great ideas, and we're gonna do this, and nobody can afford it.
And as you brought up, we are through the zoning code update and the 5-year strategies, we're looking at those incentives from both the housing perspective and the commercial side. The challenge is like, there aren't great examples to look to on the commercial side of like a commercial deed restriction or that sort of thing, so. Starting up here, like how do we even begin to define this and then really looking at fine tuning those tools, trying things out. Our guys, it's taken us 30 years to continue to improve housing and we're really just starting this journey, but you're absolutely right. We can't just, this is all about leveraging the private market. The town can't just plan to step in on all these things and provide all these needs. We have to work together. That was the whole point of the community plan.
There are a couple examples of commercial deed restrictions around Carbondale, Boulder, and Aspen and Mancos. I forgot. And Boulder's focus was on industrial space outside of the belt line or baseline. Think in Carbondale, it was a burger joint. And these are new waters for places to step into. You know, the ones that are really critical that you see where that investment has happened and it's kind of historical are daycares and doctors' offices and food shelters or food pantries and things like that, that you see as kind of critical baseline services. You know, as we start expanding that conversation, it is a really new frontier. How do you write a commercial deed restriction? What does this look like? How do you even fine tune this? You know, this is gonna be someplace that I think Ian put it really well of let's step into it gingerly, you know, like let's really try to figure it out. But we've been playing in that space actually for a long time. The town owns 22 commercial spaces that we prioritize either for special users, whether it's stepping stones for the art center or KBUT or for the fire department, that those buildings have been used by those people and are finally attuned to work with those organizations. But then we have these other, I can't remember if it was 7 that are special kind of target users, and balance are largely open that we prioritize nonprofits for and try to help subsidize and shore those up. And so although we've been playing in that space, we're looking for that private sector participation in helping create those spaces.
As we discuss this, I start coming into the thought, do we get to a point where you can't incentivize what the community needs? And throw out an idea that's not known at all, it's been discussed for a while. Mark Green put it in an editorial a few months ago. I'm not sure this is the venue, but to me, as far as ADUs, maybe beyond the point of incentivizing more than 2 or 3 years, maybe we should start thinking about requiring the restricted ADUs as part of a single family building permit. Because of where we're at, what the market has done here so relatively quickly. Just a thought.
I think there's a lot of tension between like, what can we incentivize versus what piece of value do we have? Like, do we have enough to incentivize something, or does it need to be the stick instead of carrot?
I think you try with the carrot first. Sure. And I don't see a problem in letting them short-term rent their ADU as long as they have a deed restricted ADU. Why not?
You can always hit people with a carrot.
And test these things.
Yeah,
right?
I think we got it.
Because like we're seeing that, I think what we did with the change in ADUs recently, when we were seeing that we were getting a lot of heated and plumbed garages, but no ADUs, and really taking that step back, saying, "Oh, wait a minute, is this actually what we were wanting to produce here? We were wanting, like, there's a big climate footprint with a heated garage, and retooling that and saying, what should this look like? And let's create a different off-ramp. But if you're not doing an ADU, we're limiting your kind of carbon footprint on your garage." And so now we're seeing a lot of cold garages. All right, well, that took care of one part of that question. We're not getting more ADUs, but we're not getting more heated and plumbed garages. So that was a positive step. You know, but what is the next step when your house construction costs are, you know, $5 to $6 million. You know, is there anything we can bring to the table that is of value to you? And that's something our consultants are going to look at, you know, like what can we tease out from that equation? And have we lost our carrots? You know, like, and are we ready to move to sticks? Or do we try some bigger carrots for a little bit or different carrots for a little bit?
I've always been one to think that John need both. It's better to start with the carrots. Maybe we've done that the last 2 or 3 years since those changes were made. We haven't seen the results we'd like to see. I think despite the fact we've got Whetstone coming, things within town coming, affordable housing will always be a challenge for this community. To me, when I say community, that is keeping as many people living here full time as possible. And the only way to achieve that, it seems to me, gets to a point where you've got to start using more sticks.
Yeah.
I don't think we've allowed people though to have a non-deed restricted ADU for all of them.
Since
We're talking about giving them the chance for a second dwelling that they can do whatever they want with it. If they give us a little deed restricted ADU, that's huge. We haven't done it. I think people are gonna bite at that.
And that's what comes to mind as in different types of carrots, instead of money in tap fees. It would be use, like you're describing, or square footage. If we're saying basements, for instance, you can't have a basement unless you provide a deed restricted unit or something like that. Those are kind of the different carrots we offer rather than just money for a tax.
And I think they'll do it because the closing process is such a big deal. I think we could also really easy to build somewhat affordable deed restricted ADU with pre-approved, pre-designed modular units that we can do something with, or you panelize kits from Be Public in New Mexico, whatever. Try to make it really easy. And so I know we could do it cheaper than stuff.
And I don't think honestly, but like the construction costs at this point will never be offset by the rents that are affordable. So accepting that as part of the concrete facts going into this, I think is important. Like Fading West, SIPS panels, like all of those things offer opportunity. And especially if we have model building plans where we then can kind of build relationships with some of those suppliers, but it's not gonna bring them down to the point where your ADU is gonna cash them. And so accepting that there's gonna have to be something, you know, certainly there are builders that out of the goodness of their own hearts build ADUs. There are people who are investing in them, it's just fewer and fewer. But I do think, you know, I think one of the recognizing like the not letting good be the enemy of perfect, or the other way around, I always do it wrong. That like one of the things that we'll likely have to look at if we're allowing for a second ADU is how do we perk this property now? Are we hell-bent on making sure each unit has a parking spot? Because if that does, then like, are we really squeezing the rest of the buildings? And so like this, you know, there's externalities to the decisions that we're making, and being comfortable with some of those as being like, that might be difficult. You know, like snow storage is something we always will have to balance. Like parking, is that something that is a variable that we can play with on these sites to help us get at the unit, and not fall back on I think a sidetrack of saying, oh, we're treating those tenants with disrespect by not giving them a parking space on here, that we're willing to horse trade for some of the good, recognizing it's going to change some of the ways that people live. But it is like, what value proposition do we bring to them, to the people who are able to build these homes and help produce ADUs?
Just a side note, I'm getting a little away from communities.
We are.
I mean, it's super insightful, especially with somebody on not CB's town council, where I feel like CB has really demonstrated a lot of progress that we could learn from in things. You know, actually carrot versus stick restricting short-term rentals versus like you know, like we don't actually cover. But all that is to say, I have been thinking about like, well, how could you learn from the successes that you've used in residential properties? And like, look at it from a commercial standpoint, is there an opportunity there? Like, one thing that we're starting to talk about in Mount TV is, you know, yeah, an empty home tax. Is there like a way to do like, and do you have any empty commercial spaces or empty spaces that could be community spaces? If they were either carroted or sticked, you know, incentivized or required to be utilized. It's a possibility. I don't even know the answer to that. If there's empty spaces that aren't being utilized, that could be community spaces.
I think at the base of it is always the value proposition of what is it that we have available to trade for their investments, and is it marketable? Like, how do we shape what it is that we can trade? Additional square footage, parking, relief, all of those things, and understanding those economic impacts on a pro forma of a development project. And so that's what we've got consultants lined up to do. And we've seen that math changed on ADUs. We know already how things are changing on Elk and on Bellevue as places change, who's getting priced out. And so we can see that happening, but how do we bring that down to kind of a market analysis level, help inform what we should offer so that it can be successful and helping generate these things?
There's a lot more work to come on both of these topics, clearly, and this was such a great starting discussion to really start to wrap our minds around how do we even start to define this. So the next step is on October 6th, we're gonna have a joint work session with Town Council and Beaux-Arts to really start digging more into the code and those guiding strategies for that, but then also really continuing this discussion, starting to define what is community spaces and what is community housing. There will be a lot more opportunities to dig into the details, but we're really excited. We have a firm called Economic and Planning Systems lined up. They're coming to town tomorrow that are really gonna like put the numbers to these ideas in the community plan and do a market analysis too of like, hey, we say these are the things we think we need on our cruise ship, but actually look at our market of like, yeah, you're really missing this, or you're really at risk of losing that, and that'll really help guide this process. So maybe to go back and start to wrap up, are there any tweaks as of right now you would make to the working definition? And I'm looking at our wordsmither over here, and then we'll move into that roundtable to wrap up before lunch of how, as we move into this next step of really getting into these details, what does success look like to you? So maybe to the definition first.
I just want to push back a little bit on this cruise ship thing. We are not, I don't think as a community, we want to be a commodity in the way that a cruise ship is. I understand the conceptual thing, but I think we are more of an island. I think we are a physical place. We aren't, you know, moving from place to place, taking and using. We are.
Don't exist for the.
Yes.
For the cruise ship.
Yeah.
At all.
So that's just. I think I worked in Key West too long to want to be anything to do with a cruise ship. So that is
It's a good point.
Just personal experience.
Other initial tweaks on the working definition, obviously a work in progress. You don't need a perfect definition today.
Feels like a good closeout for all these months. You know, and I very much appreciate the fact that we all stuck together and we were listening to everybody else. It's where I got so tweaked at the peanut roundabout, you know, that everybody didn't just get to talk. They went into little groups. So thank you. This was good.
I don't know if it needs to go in the definition, but I appreciated some of the discussion live on new spaces. But I think it's important to, I heard a number of people, Anna, Jim and John mention how to retain existing spaces if they're wanting to fight it out and stay, you know. So I don't know that that has to go in the definition, but new versus existing too.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think some of the discussion we had today around how do we define services really gets at a lot of that too, which is I think the sub definitions are going to be really important, and how not only we define community spaces, but how we define what's in community spaces in terms of services, what the incentives are.
What's the thriving piece in the community plan? Is that like a value or, you know, helping our community thrive? Or is which, 'cause it seems like community spaces are a big part of thriving, helping us thrive. There's a tight connection.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the overarching vision of the community plan is that thriving community, and we have there's a spread in the plan with a narrative describing that touches on both the housing and the spaces side. Move into your.
Yeah, well, and I think our lunches are about to arrive, and I think we've actually started to move into our kind of definitions of success where we wanted to end. Put a bow on the working definition of community spaces. I think we made some really good refinements on, you know, simplifying it, defining services and what we mean by services and the commercial and the non-commercial and the health and human services that are so important. And then also the gathering places and those ecosystems that meet the everyday needs and foster the community connection. The theme of partnerships was present in there too. So I think that's something that will continue to work into the definition, I would imagine, unless anybody's opposed. Great addition. Excellent. Well, should we start to wrap up now with thinking about this transition into implementation, where the zoning and the market analysis that Aaron was talking about is really going to help us answer a lot of these questions about the balance between the carrots and the sticks. But thinking forward, I mean, how do you define success as we move into implementation? I think, Lo, you started us off so well. I think sticking together and continuing to talk and not breaking out into these little silos is super important to being successful as we get into the hard work of actually building things and implementing the plans. So we can go around the horn, or if anybody just wants to popcorn, what comes to mind when you think about success for this transition into implementation?
I want to say what I think is success is having 4 town council members here, being a part of this to hear us. Thank you, you 4. And then having what I consider the core staff people that are important to implementing this, having you guys here. And then there's these couple of odd ones of us that aren't either of those things. But I thank you guys for being here because I think it's made a huge difference for people to be heard and for you to hear.
5 council.
Yeah, sorry.
Another meeting.
I would build on that. I think it's the town's made a huge commitment to engagement in the past few years, and success is absolutely continuation of engagement. A lot of work.
I think it would be successful if we had a kind of an agreed upon clear definition of what it is we're trying to do and the desired outcomes, right? We're sort of unified and there's clarity in what is these spaces and what are we trying, what's our outcome?
And maybe in piggybacking on the council statement, are there opportunities to meet these needs across municipalities, across, you know, maybe we don't have to go to Benton for something, but can work with Mount CB.
Oh, you go with that.
But, you know, because we are doing
You guys took pickleball.
Yeah.
you know, yeah, there's so many things we could go down that rabbit hole.
Measure success, you need metric. The one thing would be increasing locally full-time use housing from 65% to 70%. And some similar metric for such as losing no further locally serving businesses. Losing no more.
I think another good metric would be increasing the number of businesses that are only owned by one, or that a purveyor only owns one of. Does that make sense? Like kind of
Single owner.
Yeah, like,
Not a chain.
As opposed to.
yeah,
Not even chain.
or like even,
Property owners?
Victor owning, you know, a bunch of different restaurants in town, like, I don't see that as a beneficial thing for the community.
Could you also?
In general, not to say that what he is doing specifically, you know, blah, blah, blah.
The he, the capital H he. No, he was saying the truth. Yeah.
Could you also establish like an affordability metric for, say, products and services?
Accessibility.
Or like-
Inflation.
Yeah, like, we've got that, like AMI for housing, so what would an equivalent be for? Right, a beer, a burger, a backpack, a pair of shoes, a haircut.
It seems like you could have a metric for sort of goodness that's being accomplished. I think we do it well with our grants and our, you know, we're trying to measure goodness. Maybe that's different.
No.
What keeps coming back to my mind is enabling people who live and work here to thrive. And really getting at what does it mean for people to thrive and how are we not meeting that part? So for me, in my role, thinking about like the teen center has come up and I definitely see, you know, roving middle schoolers looking for a space and hanging out in Jerry's gym. And so, you know, what are those things that maybe we're not hitting from a thriving community standpoint and prioritizing those in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think something I see in like successful implementation is an ability to pivot and adapt. And so that goes back into that communication, into the keeping the conversation going is like, once we implement something, understanding that it will have to shift to really accomplish the right goals and it will have to settle, and being aware and conscious of that as we make the decision will be important to me, understanding that we've succeeded.
And part of that for me is understanding what are the obstacles for the businesses who are leaving, or the individuals who cannot make a go of it, like what are those obstacles and how can we pivot to address keeping those businesses and individuals successful? Because I think, you know, we have these, I consider what we've been doing today, this wish list, this dream of what we would love to have in town, but ultimately, we're not in control of what kind of a business, like, if the market were working, what we desired to have, someone would open a business and serve us with, and it's broken because of this expense. So understanding how can we help with those obstacles so that someone who would be doing that can actually thrive.
One thing too, just wanted to give a big shout out to Glow and the senior center folks. And being able to pivot from what's the ideal to what can we actually make happen? And so meeting such an incredible community need.
Cool,
With
thank
the resources and the services and amenities that we currently have. By partnering within our small community and recognizing that we can't all have our very own specific use, single use amenity that we share and we collaborate. And at the end of the day, I believe that makes it a much stronger service or end product. And so just kudos to meeting that need.
We've had over 50 people at our 5 luncheons.
That's so awesome.
We have a MailChimp, which I think that is, and that's okay, I'm happy someone else is doing it. We have 90 people on our MailChimp.
And female.
Last time there was 60 readers. You've seen how many people read it. You know, that's pretty exciting. You know, it's pretty fantastic. I'm really thrilled. And, you know, not many of you in here are part of the senior world, but Monday we're going to Hartman's Castles at 9:30 in the morning.
How old, yeah?
60 or over, they said. So.
I did do a little action, they're quite 9 months.
Yeah.
I would add, some people are doing this already. There's some pretty best practice. So there's some communities have learned some things that we could learn from them. I don't know how we figure out who that is.
I think along that same strain is like what after we did a lot of our STR and we were doing a lot of housing, like I found an article in the Guardian referencing Crested Butte, just totally randomly. And so I think that's one of our things about success is that other communities will continue to reach out for help from us. And I think that will be a way of judging whether or not we've succeeded. If nobody asks for our help, then we probably aren't doing a good job.
If we're not the model for someone.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go totally off topic. Sorry, how unusual for me. Totally off topic, but Thursday night, Paul Anderson is coming into town. Our book club for the month at the museum was The Town That Said Hell No. He's gonna be here at 6 o'clock and he's gonna talk about writing the book. I think it's something that we all could enjoy and maybe you haven't heard. And then just for some of us who have been here for decades, Chris Rouse's memorial is 4 o'clock at the museum on Friday. Just for some of us who've known him, because Roanne asked me to please share it. I don't think she's thinking that many people are coming, quite frankly, so. Just to tribute Sharon and Ron and Roanne. Anyway, sorry, it's so off topic, but important. Yeah.
I was just gonna share, when I think of implementation, you see on the radar, the pushback generally, and I think that's important. But I think it's important that we understand there is pushback and that we're valuable, okay? So as council members and decision makers and leaders in our community, we need to recognize our value. And so when we get this pushback, we recognize that we're valuable and you should meet these things that we're asking for. And we're not gonna acquiesce, we're not gonna step back, we're gonna stand on it. So let's all kind of recognize that. We're valuable here. This is a small ship. We can decide what's in it and what's not in it. And let's qualify ourselves as a valuable community that way.
I'd kind of like to piggyback on that and maybe just put one more in the definition that maybe we could add to that of meet everyday needs, foster connection, and like enable our values to thrive. Because yeah, there's not like our everyday needs don't, like our values and needs are not one and the same. So like culture and the things that we love about this place are not necessarily everyday needs, but I feel like should be highlighted. And we've really done a great job of outlining our values in the community compass. So giving that a space. There might be better wording there, but.
It's a working definition.
Great.
Well, lunch is here, and I don't want to keep you guys past noon, but I was thinking maybe if you want to grab lunch and we could continue like a casual conversation over lunch of just other ideas, if there's thoughts on like, the question I have is making sure we really have good continued engagement at this stage. I know like a year ago, there was a lot of, there's overwhelm, there's so many plans, we're planning the team, how do we like kind of reinvigorate and get people to stay engaged as we implement, because as we get more into the details, there will inevitably be more pushback. So that's something to think about over sandwiches too, but we would definitely love to continue the conversation. I don't want to keep you from your lunch.
And thank Josephine, I believe she's closing October 4th.
Just
Closing.
Closing.
Just keep
Well, I'm sorry. One day it's one thing, one day.
That's great.
She was trying to find someone to buy it, and then she was keeping the catering, and then she wasn't keeping the catering, so I don't know what today is.
She just said outside she's stepping away from the food industry.
Oh, well, she's been a long time caterer. Still, you know, you can only do that like working in a restaurant. You can only do that for so many years and then burnout happens. Sorry to lose her though.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much. The fifth meeting of the